Courting of Dinah Shad by Rudyard Kipling. All day I had followed at the heels of a pursuing army, engaged on one of the finest battles that ever camp of exercise beheld. 30,000 troops had, by the wisdom of the government of India, been turned loose over a few thousand square miles of country to practice in peace what they would never attempt in war. The army of the south had finally pierced the center of the army of the north and was pouring through the gap, hot-foot, to capture a city of strategic importance. Its front extended fanwise, the sticks being represented by regiments strung out along the line of route backward to the divisional transport columns, and all the lumber that trails behind an army on the move. On its right, the broken left of the army of the north was flying in mass, chased by the southern horse and hammered by the southern guns, till these had been pushed far beyond the limits of their last support. Then the flying army of the north sat down to rest, while the commandant of the pursuing force telegraphed that he held it in check and observation. Unluckily, he did not observe that 3 miles to his right flank, a flying column of northern horse, with a detachment of Gurkhas and British troops, had been pushed round, as fast as the falling light allowed, to cut across the entire rear of the southern army, to break, as it were, all the ribs of the fan where they converged, by striking at the transport reserve, ammunition, and artillery supplies. Their instructions were to go in, avoiding the few scouts who might not have been drawn off by the pursuit, and create sufficient excitement to impress the southern army with the wisdom of guarding their own flank and rear before they captured cities. It was a pretty maneuver, neatly carried out. Speaking for the 2nd Division of the Southern Army, our first intimation of it was at twilight, when the artillery were laboring in deep sand. Most of the escort were trying to help them out, and the main body of the infantry had gone on. A Noah's Ark of elephants, camels, and the mixed menagerie of an Indian transport train bubbled and squealed behind the guns when there rose up from nowhere in particular British infantry to the extent of 3 companies, who sprung to the heads of the gun horses and brought all to a standstill amid oaths and cheers. "How's that, umpire?" said the major commanding the attack, and with one voice the drivers and limber gunners answered, "Hout," while the colonel of artillery sputtered. "All your scouts are charging our main body," said the major. "Your flanks are unprotected for 2 miles. I think we've broken the back of this division, and listen, there go the Gurkhas." A weak fire broke from the rear guard more than a mile away and was answered by cheerful howlings. The Gurkhas, who should have swung clear of the 2nd Division, had stepped on its tail in the dark, but, drawing off, hastened to reach the next line, which lay almost parallel to us, 5 or 6 miles away. Our column swayed and surged irresolutely. 3 batteries, the divisional ammunition reserve, the baggage, and a section of hospital and bearer corps. The commandant ruefully promised to report himself cut up to the nearest umpire, and, commending his cavalry and all other cavalry to the care of Eblis, toiled on to resume touch with the rest of the division. "We'll bivouac here tonight," said the major. "I have a notion that the Gurkhas will get caught. They may want us to reform on. Stand easy till the transport gets away." A hand caught my beast's bridle and led him out of the choking dust. A larger hand deftly canted me out of the saddle, and 2 of the hugest hands in the world received me sliding. Pleasant is the lot of the special correspondent who falls into such hands as those of Privates Mulvaney, Ortheris, and Leroyd. "And that's all right," said the Irishman calmly. "We thought we'd find you somewheres hereby. Is there anything of yours in the transport? Ortheris'll fetch it out." Ortheris did. Fetch it out from under the trunk of an elephant in the shape of a servant and an animal, both laden with medical comforts. The little man's eyes sparkled. "If the brutal and licentious soldiery of these parts get sight of the thruck," said Mulvaney, making practised investigation, "they'll loot everything. They're being fed on iron filings and dob biscuit these days, but glory's no compensation for a bellyache. Praise be, we're here to protect you, sir. Beer, sausage, bread soft, and that's a curiosity, soup in a tin. Whiskey by the smell avud, and fowls. Mother av Moses, but ye take the field like a confectioner. 'Tis scandalous. "Here's our officer," said Ortheris significantly. "When the sergeant's done lushing, the privet may clean the pot." I bundled several things into Mulvaney's haversack before the major's hand fell on my shoulder, and he said tenderly, "Requisitioned for the Queen's service." Wolseley was quite wrong about special correspondents. They are the best friends of the soldier. "Come and take potluck with us tonight." And so it happened amid laughter and shoutings that my well-considered commissariat melted away to reappear on the mess table, which was a waterproof sheet spread on the ground. The flying column had taken 3 days' rations with it, and there be few things nastier than government rations, especially when government is experimenting with German toys. Erbswurst, tinned beef, of surpassing tinniness, compressed vegetables, and meat biscuits may be nourishing, but what Thomas Atkins wants is bulk in his inside. The major, assisted by his brother officers, purchased goats for the camp, and so made the experiment of no effect. Long before the fatigue party sent to collect brushwood had returned, the men were settled down by their valises. Kettles and pots had appeared from the surrounding country and were dangling over fires as the kid and the compressed vegetables bubbled together. There rose a cheerful clinking of mess tins. Outrageous demands for a little more stuffing with that there liver wing, and gust on gust of chaff as pointed as a bayonet, and as delicate as a gun butt. "The boys are in a good temper," said the major. "They'll be singing presently." Well, a night like this is enough to keep them happy. Over our heads burn the wonderful Indian stars, which are not all pricked in on one plane, but preserving an orderly perspective. Draw the eye through the velvet darkness of the void up to the barred doors of heaven itself. The earth was a grey shadow more unreal than the sky. We could hear her breathing lightly in the pauses between the howling of the jackals, the movement of the wind in the tamarisks, and the fitful mutter of musketry fire leagues away to the left. A native woman in some unseen hut began to sing. The mail train thundered past on its way to Delhi, and a roosting crow cawed drowsily. Then there was a belt loosening silence about the fires, and the even breathing of the crowded earth took up the story. The men, full-fed, turned to tobacco and song their officers with them. Happy is the subaltern who can win the approval of the musical critics in his regiment, and is honoured among the more intricate step dancers. By him, as by him who plays cricket craftily, will Thomas Atkins stand in time of need when he will let a better officer go on alone. The ruined tombs of forgotten Mussulman saints heard the ballad of Agra Town, the Buffalo Battery, marching to Kabul, the long, long Indian day, the place where the Punkah Coolie died, and that crashing chorus which announces youth's daring spirit, manhood's fire, firm hand, and eagle eye, must be a choir who would aspire to see the grey boar die. Today, of all those jovial thieves who appropriated my commissariat, and lay and laughed round that waterproof sheet, not one remains. They went to camps that were not of exercise, and battles without umpires. Burma, the Sudan, and the frontier fever and fight took them in their time. I drifted across to the men's fires in search of Mulvaney, whom I found greasing his feet by the blaze. There is nothing particularly lovely in the sight of a private thus engaged after a long day's march, but when you reflect on the exact proportion of the might, majesty, dominion, and power of the British Empire that stands on those feet, you take an interest in the proceedings. There's a blister bad luck to it. On the heel, said Mulvaney. I can't touch it. Prick it out, little man. Ortheris produced his housewife, eased the trouble with a needle, stabbed Mulvaney in the calf with the same weapon, and was incontinently kicked into the fire. I've broke the best of my toes over you, ye grinning child, of disruption, said Mulvaney, sitting cross-legged and nursing his feet. Then, seeing me, "Oh, it's you, sir. Be welcome, and take that marauding Scott's place. Jock, hood him down on the cinders for a bit." But Ortheris escaped and went elsewhere as I took possession of the hollow he had scraped for himself and lined with his greatcoat. Leroyd, on the other side of the fire, grinned affably, and in a minute fell fast asleep. "There's the height. I've politeness for you," said Mulvaney, lighting his pipe with a flaming branch. "But Jock's eaten half a box of your sardines at one gulp, and I think the tin too. What's the best with you, sir? How did you happen to be on the losing side this day when we captured you?" "The Army of the South is winning all along the line," I said. "Thin. That line's the hangman's rope, saving your presence. You'll learn tomorrow how we retreated to draw them on before we made him trouble, and that's what a woman does. By the same token, we'll be attacked before the dawning, and it would be better not to slip your boots." "How do I know that?" "By the light of pure reason. Here are 3 companies of us ever so far inside of the enemy's flank, and a crowd of roaring, tarring, and squealing. Cavalry gone on just to turn out the whole nest of them. Of course, the enemy will pursue by brigades like as not, and then we'll have to run for aught. Mark my words. I am of the opinion of Polonius when he said, 'Don't fight with every Scot for the pure joy of fighting, but if you do, knock the nose of him first and frequent. We ought to have gone on and helped the Gorkas.'" "But what do you know about Polonius?" I demanded. This was a new side of Mulvaney's character. "All that Shakespeare ever wrote, and a deal more that the gallery shouted," said the man-of-war, carefully lacing his boots. "Did I not tell you of Silver's Theatre in Dublin when I was younger than I am now, and a patron of the drama? Old Silver would never pay actor, man or woman, their just dues, and by consequence his companies was collapsible at the last minute. Then the boys would clamour to take a part, and oft as not, old Silver made them pay for the fun. Faith, I've seen Hamlet played wid a new black eye, and the Queen as full as a cornucopia. I remember once Hogan, that listed in the Black Tyrone and was shot in South Africa, he seduced old Silver into giving him Hamlet's part instead of me. That had a fine fancy for rhetoric in those days. Of course, I went into the gallery and began to fill the pit with other people's hats, and I passed the time of day to Hoggin walking through Denmark like a hamstrung mule with a pole on his back. 'Hamlet,' says he, 'there's a hole in your heel. Pull up your stockings, Hamlet,' says he. Aye. 'Hamlet, Hamlet, for the love of decency, drop that skull and pull up your stockings.' The whole house began to tell him that. He stopped his soliloquisms mid-between. 'My stockings may be coming down, or they may not,' says he, screwing his eye into the gallery, for well he knew who I was. 'But after the performance is over, me and the ghost'll trample the guts out of you, Terence, with your ass's bray.' And that's how I come to know about Hamlet. Those days, those days. Did you ever have honest endeavourment and nothing to pay for it in your life, sir?" "Never without having to pay," I said. "That's true. 'Tis main, when you consider on ut, but ut's the same with horse or foot. A headache if you drink, and a bellyache if you eat too much, and a heartache to cape all down. Faith, the beast only gets the colic, and he's the lucky man." He dropped his head and stared into the fire, fingering his moustache the while. From the far side of the bivouac, the voice of Corbeil Nolan, senior subaltern of B Company, uplifted itself in an ancient and much appreciated song of sentiment, the men moaning melodiously behind him. The north wind blew coldly. She dropped from that hour. My own little Kathleen, my sweet little Kathleen. Kathleen, my Kathleen. Kathleen O'More, with 45 O's in the last word. Even at that distance you might have cut the soft South Irish accent with a shovel. For all we take, we must pay. But the price is cruel high, murmured Mulvaney when the chorus had ceased. What's the trouble? I said gently, for I knew that he was a man of an inextinguishable sorrow. Here now, said he. Ye know what I am now. I know what I meant to be at the beginning of my service. I've told you time and again, and what I have not, Dinah Shadd has. And what am I? Oh, Mary Mother of Heaven, an ood-drunken, untrustable baste of a privet that has seen the regiment change out from colonel to drummer boy, not once or twict, but scores av times. Aye, scores. An' me not so near getting promotion as in the first, and me living on an Captain Clear O'Clink, not by my own good conduct, but the kindness of some officer boy young enough to be son to me. Do I not know it? Can I not tell when I'm passed over at parade, though I'm rocking? Full have liquor and ready to fall all in one piece, such as even a sucking child might see, Beckersy. Oh, 'tis only old Mulvaney, and when I'm let off in the orderly room, through some thrick of the tongue and a ready answer, and the old man's mercy is ut smiling. I feel when I fall away and go back to Dinah Shadd, trying to carry it all off as a joke. Not I. 'Tis hell to me dumb hell through it all, and next time when the fit comes, I will be as bad again. Good cause, the regiment has to know me for the best soldier in oot. Better cause have I to know Miss Heath for the worst man. I'm only fit to tash the new drafts. What I'll never learn myself, and I am sure as though. I heard it, that the minute one of these pink-eyed recruities gets away from my mind ye now. And listen to this, Jim boy. Sure I am that the sergeant hoods me up to him for a warning. So I tash, as they say at musketry instruction, by direct and ricochet fire. Lord be good to me, for I have stud some trouble. Lie down and go to sleep, said I, not being able to comfort or advise. You're the best man in the regiment, and, next to Ortheris, the biggest fool. Lie down and wait till we're attacked. What force will they turn out? Guns, think you? Try that with your lords and ladies, twisting and turning the talk, though ye meant it well. Ye could say nothing to help me, and yet you never knew what cause I had to be what I am. Begin at the beginning and go on to the end, I said royally. But rake up the fire a bit first. I passed Ortheris's bayonet for a poker. That shows how little you know what to do, said Mulvaney, putting it aside. Fire takes all the heart out of the steel, and the next time, maybe, that our little man is fighting for his life, his brad-all-'ll break. And so you'll have killed him, maneen, no more than to keep yourself warm. 'Tis a recruity's thrick, that. Pass the clanine rod, saw. I snuggled down, abashed, and after an interval the low, even voice of Mulvaney began. 2. Did I ever tell you how Dinah Shadd came to be wife of mine? I dissembled a burning anxiety that I had felt for some months ever since. Dinah Shadd, the strong, the patient, and the infinitely tender, had, of her own good love and free will, washed a shirt for me, moving in a barren land where washing was not. I can't remember, I said casually. Was it before or after you made love to Annie Bregan and got no satisfaction? The story of Annie Bregan is written in another place. It is one of the many episodes in Mulvaney's checkered career. Before? Before long, before was that business, Av Annie Bragan and the corporal's ghost. Never woman was the worse for me when I had married Dinah. There's a time for all things, and I know how to kape all things in place, barren the drink. That kapes me in my place, wid no hope av comin' to be aught else. Begin at the beginning, I insisted. Mrs. Sisted. Mulvaney told me that you married her when you were quartered in Crab Bokar barracks. And the same is a cesspit, said Mulvaney piously. She spoke through, did Dinah. 'Twas this way. Talking of that, have ye ever fallen in love, sir? I preserved the silence of the damned. Mulvaney continued. Thin, I will assume that ye have not. I did. In the days of my youth, as I have more than once told you, I was a man that filled the eye and delighted the soul of women. Never man was hated as I have been. Never man was loved as I. No, not within half a day's march, avut. For the first 5 years of my service, when I was what I would give my soul to be now, I tuck whatever was wide in my reach and digested it, and that's more than most men can say. Drink I took, and it did me no harm. By the hollow of heaven, I could play wid 4 women at once, and keep them from finding out anything about the other 3, and smile like a full-blown marigold through it all. Dick Coolhan of the battery will have down on us tonight. Could drive his team no better than I mine, and I hilled the worser cattle. And so I lived, and so I was happy, till after that business wid Annie Bregan, she that turned me off as cool as a meat safe and taught me where I stood in the mind of an honest woman. 'Twas no sweet dose to take. After that, I sickened a while and took thought to my regimental work, conceiting meself I would study and be a sergeant, and a major general 20 minutes after that. But on top of my ambitiousness, there was an empty place in my soul, and me own opinion of meself could not fill it. Says he to meself, Terence, you're a great man and the best set up in the regiment. Go on and get promotion. Says meself to me, what for? Says he to meself, for the glory of ut. Says meself to me, will that fill these 2 strong arms of yours, Terence? Go to the devil, says he. Easy. Go to the married lines, says meself to me. 'Tis the same thing, says I to meself. Have you the same man, utish? Said meself to me. On. With that I considered on it a long while. Did you ever feel that way, sir? I snored gently, knowing that if Mulvaney were uninterrupted he would go on. The clamour from the bivouac fires beat up to the stars as the rival singers of the companies were pitted against each other. So I felt that way, and a bad time it was. Once, being a fool, I went into the married lines, more for the sake of speaking, to our old colour sergeant Shad, than for any thruck-wid women folk. I was a corporal, then reduced afterwards, but a corporal then. I've got a photograph of meself to prove it. You take a cup of tea with us, says he. I will that, I says he, though tea is not my diversion. 'Twould be better for you if it were, says ud Mother Shad. And she had ought to know, for Shad, in the end of his service, drank bungful each night. But that I took off my gloves there was pipe clay in them, so that they stood alone, and pulled up my chair, looking round at the china ornaments and bits of things in the Shad's quarters. They were things that belonged to a woman, and no camp kit, here today and dissipated next. You're comfortable in this place, sergeant, says he. 'Tis the wife that did it, boy, says he, pointing the stem of his pipe to ood Mother Shad, and she smacked the top of his bald head upon the compliment. That means you want money, says she, and thin win. The kittle was to be filled. Dinah came in, my Dinah, her sleeves rowelled up to the elbow, and her hair in a golden glory over her forehead. the big blue eyes beneath twinkling, like stars on a frosty night, and the tread of her 2 feet lighter than waste paper from the colonel's basket in oldly room when ut's emptied. Been but a slip of a girl. She went pink at seeing me, and I twisted me moustache and looked at a picture fawnin's the war. Never show a woman that you care the snap of a finger for her, and begad, she'll come bleating to your boot heels. I suppose that's why you followed Annie Bregan till everybody in the married quarters laughed at you, said I, remembering that unhallowed wooing and casting off the disguise of drowsiness. I'm laying down the general theory of the attack, said Mulvaney, driving his foot into the dying fire. If you read the soldier's pocketbook, which never any soldier reads, you'll see that there are exceptions. When Dinah was out at the door, and 'twas as though the sunlight had gone too, mother of heaven, Sergeant, says he, but is that your daughter? I've believed that way these 18 years, says Udshed, his eyes twinkling. But Mrs. Shedd has her own opinion, like every other woman. 'Tis wid yours this time for a miracle, says Mother Shad. Then why, in the name of fortune, did I never see her before? Says he. Because you've been thrapseen. Round with the married women these 3 years past. She was a bit of a child till last year, and she shot up with the spring, says old Mother Shad. I'll thrips no more, says I. Do you mean that? Says old Mother Shad, looking at me sideways like a hen looks at a hawk when the chickens are running free. Try me. And tell, says I. Wid that I pulled on my gloves, drank off the tea, and went out of the house as stiff as at General Parade. For well I knew that Dinah Shad's eyes were in the small of my back out of the scullery window. Faith, that was the only time I mourned. I was not a cavalryman, for the sake of the spurs to jingle. I went out to think, and I did a powerful lot of thinking, but it all came round to that slip of a girl in the dotted blue dress, wide the blue eyes and the sparkle in them. Thin I kept off canteen, and I kept to the married quarters or nearby on the chance of meeting Dinah. Did I meet her? Oh, my time passed, did I not? With a lump in my throat as big as my valise, and my heart going like a farrier's forge on a Saturday morning. 'Twas good day to ye, Miss Dinah, and good day to you, Corporal, for a week or two, and divil a bit further could I get, becca say of. The respect I had to that girl that I could ha, broken be-chewed finger and thumb. Here I giggled as I recalled the gigantic figure of Dinah Shad when she handed me my shirt. Ye may laugh, grunted Mulvaney, but I'm speaking. The truth's, and 'tis you that are in fault. Dinah was a girl that would have taken the imperiousness out of the Duchess of Clonmel in those days. Flower hand, foot of shod air, and the eyes of the morning she had. That is my wife today, O Dinah, and never aught else than Dinah Shad to me. 'Twas after 3 weeks standing off and on, and niver making headway, except through the eyes, that a little drummer boy grinned in me face when I had admonished him with the buckle, ave my belt for rioting all over the place. I'm not the only one that doesn't keep to barracks, says he. I tuck him by the scruff of his neck. My heart was hung on a hair-trigger those days. You will understand an outwit, says he, or I lave no bone of you unbroke. Speak to Dempsey, says he, howling. Dempsey, which, says he, ye unwashed limb of Satan? Of the bobtailed dragoons, says he. He's seen her home from her aunt's house in the civil lines 4 times this fortnight. Child, says he, dropping him, your tongue's stronger than your body. Go to your quarters. I'm sorry I dressed you down. At that I went 4 ways to wanst hunting Dempsey. I was mad to think that wid all my airs among women I should ha been chated by a basin-faced fool, have a cavalryman not fit to trust on a mule thrunk. Presently I found him in our lines. The bobtails was quartered next us, and a tallowy, top-heavy son, aber she-mule he was, with his big brass spurs and his plastrons on his epigastons and all. But he never flinched a hair. "A word wid you, Dempsey," says I. "You've walked wid Dinah Shadd 4 times this fortnight gone." "What's that to you?" says he. "I'll walk 40 times more, and 40 on top of that, ye shovel-footed, clod-breaking infantry, Lance Corporeal." Before I cudjarred, he had his gloved fist home on me cheek, and down I went full sprawl. "Will that content you?" says he, blowing on his knuckles for all the world like a Scots Greys officer. "Content?" says he. "Aye. For your own sake, man, take off your spurs, peer your jacket, and on glove. 'Tis the beginning of the overture. Stand up." He stood all he knew, but he never peeled his jacket, and his shoulders had no fair play. I was fighting for Dinah Shadd, and that cut on me cheek. What hope had he forninst me? "Stand up," sees I, time and again, when he was beginning to quarter the ground and yard high and go large. "This isn't riding school," says he. "Oh, man, stand up and let me get at ye." But whine, I saw he would be running about. I group his stock in me left and his waist belt in me right, and swung him clear to me right front. Head under, he hammering me nose till the wind was knocked out of him on the bare ground. "Stand up," says he, "or I'll kick your head into your chest." And I would have done it too, so raggin' mad I was. "Me collarbones brook," says he. "Help me back to lines. I'll walk wid her no more." So I helped him back. "And was his collarbone broken?" I asked, for I fancied that only Leroyd could neatly accomplish that terrible throw. He pitched on his left shoulder point. It was. Next day the news was in both barracks, and when I met Dinah Shadd with a cheek, like all the regimental tailor's samples, there was no "Good morning, Corporal," or aught else. "And what have I done, Miss Shadd?" says I, very bold, plenty myself forninst her, "that ye should not pass the time o' day?" "Ye've half-killed Rough Rider Dempsey," says she, her dear blue eyes filling up. "Maybe," says I. "Was he a friend of yours that saw ye home 4 times in a fortnight?" "Yes," says she, very bold, but her mouth was down at the corners. And what's that to you?" "Ask Dempsey," says he, pretending to go away. "Did you fight for me then, ye silly man?" she says, though she knew it all along. "Who else?" says I, and I took 1 pace to the front. "I wasn't worth aught," says she, finger in her apron. "That's for me to say," says ye. "Shall I say aught?" "Yes," says she, in a saint's whisper. "An." At that I explained myself, and she told me what every man that is a man, and many that is a woman, hears once in his life. "But what made ye cry at starting, Dinah, darling?" says he. Your bloody cheek," says she, ducking her little head down on my sash. "I was duty for the day, whimpering like a sorrowful angel. Now, a man could take that 2 ways. I took it as pleased me best, and my first kiss wid it. Mother of innocence! But I kissed her on the tip of the nose and under the eye, and a girl that lets a kiss come tumbleways like that has never been kissed before. Take note of that, so. Thin we went, hand in hand, to old Mother Shadd, like 2 little child her, and she said it was no bad thing, and old Shadd nodded behind his pipe, and Dinah ran away to her own room. That day I throd on rolling clouds. All earth was too small to hold me. Begad, I could have picked the sun out of the sky for a live coal to me pipe, so magnificent I was. But I took recruities at squad drill, and began with general battalion advance, when I should have been balanced stepping 'em, Eya, that day, that day. A very long pause. Well, said I. It was all wrong, said Mulvaney, with an enormous sigh. Sure, I know that every bit of it was me own foolishness. That night I took maybe the half av 3 pints. Not enough to turn the hair of a man in his natural senses. But I was more than half drunk with pure joy, and that canteen beer was so much whiskey to me. I can't tell how it came about, but Beccassy, I had no thought for any one except Dinah. Beccassy, I hadn't slipped her little white arms from me neck 5 minutes. Beccassy. The breath av her kiss was not gone from my mouth. I must go through the married lines on me way to Corthers, and I must stay talking to a red-headed Mullingar heifer. Of a girl, Judy Sheehy. That was daughter to Mother Sheehy, the wife of Nick Sheehy. The canteen sergeant, the black curse of She-Legby on the whole, brood that are above grounds this day. And what are ye hooding your head that high for, Corporal? Says Judy. Come in and thry a cup of tea, she sees, standing in the doorway. Being an unbustable fool, and thinking of anything but tea, I went. Mother's at canteen, sees Judy, smoothing the hair of hers that was like red snakes, and looking at me corner ways out of her green cat's eyes. Ye will not mind, Corporal? I can endure, says I. Oh, Mother Sheehy be no diversion of mine, nor her daughter too. Judy fetched the tea things and put them on the table, leaning over me very close to get them square. I drew back, thinking of Dinah. Is ut afraid you are a vi? A girl alone? Says Judy. No, says I. Why should I be? That rests wide the girl, says Judy, drawing a chair next to mine. Thin there, let it rest, says I, and thinking I'd been a trifle unpolite, I says, the tea's not quite sweet enough for me taste. Put your little finger in the cup, Judy, 'twill make it nectar. What's nectar? Says she. Something very sweet, says I, and for the sinful life of me, I could not help looking at her out of the corner of my eye, as I was used to look at a woman. Go on with ye, Corporal, says she, you're a flirt. On me, sowl, I'm not, says ye, I. Then you're a cruel, handsome man, and that's worse, says ye, having big sighs and looking crossways. You know your own mind, says I. 'Twould be better for me if I did not, she says. There's a deal to be said on both sides of that, says I, not thinking. Say your own part of it then, Terence. Darlin', says she. For begad, I'm thinking I've said too much or too little for an honest girl, and wid that she put her arms round me neck and kissed me. There's no more to be said after that, says he, kissing her back again. Oh, the main scut that I was, my head ringing wid Dinah Shad. How does it come about, sir, that when a man has put the comother on wane woman, he's sure bound to put it on another? 'Tis the same thing at musketry. One day every shot goes wide or into the bank, and the next lay high, lay low, sight or snap. You can't get off the bullseye for 10 shots running. That only happens to a man who has had a good deal of experience. He does it without thinking, I replied. Thanking you for the compliment, sir. What may be so, but I'm doubting whether you meant it for a compliment. Here now. I sat there with Judy on my knee, telling me all manner of nonsense, and only saying yes and no, when I'd much better have kept tongue between teeth. And that was not an hour after I had left Dinah. What I was thinking of I cannot say. Presently, quiet as a cat, old Mother Sheehy came in velvet, drunk. She had her daughter's red hair, but 'twas bald in patches, and I could see in her wicked old face, clear as lightning, what Judy would be 20 year to come. I was for jumping up, but Judy never moved. Terence has promised, Mother, says she, Anne. The cold sweat broke out all over me. Old Mother Sheehy sat down of a heap and began playing with the cups. Thin, you're a well-matched pair, she sees, very thick. For he's the biggest rogue that I've spoiled the Queen's shoe leather, and off, Judy, says I. Ye should not talk nonsense to your mother. Get her to bed, girl. Nonsense? Says the old woman, pricking up her ears like a cat and gripping the table edge. 'Twill be the most nonsensical nonsense for you, ye grinning badger, if nonsense 'tis. Get clear, you. I'm going to bed. I ran out into the dark, me head in a stew and me heart sick, but I had sense enough to see that I brought it all on myself. It's this, to pass the time av day to a panjandrum of hellcats, says I. What I've said, and what I've not said, do not matter. Judy and her dam will hold me for a promised man, and Dinah will give me the go, and I deserve it. I will go and get drunk, says I, and forget about it, for 'tis plain I'm not a marrying man. On me way to canteen, I ran against Lascelles, colour sergeant. That was avy company, a hard man, wid a torment, avy wife. You've the head avy drowned man on your shoulders, Cece, and you're going. Where you'll get a worse one. Come back, Cece. Let me go, Cece. I've thrown me luck over the wall with me own hand. Then that's not the way to get it back, says he. Have out with your trouble, ye fool boy. And I told him how the matter was. He sucked his lower lip. You've been thrapped, says he. Do she would be the better for a man's name to hers as soon as she can. And ye thought ye put the commother on her. That's the natural vanity of the baste. Terence, you're a big-born fool, but you're not bad enough to marry into that company. If you said anything, for all your protestations, I'm sure you did or did not, which is worse, eat at all. Lie like the father of all lies, but come out of out free of Judy. Do I not know what it is to marry a woman that was the very spit of Judy when she was young? I'm getting old, and I've large patience. But you, Terence, you'd raise hand on Judy and kill her in a year. Never mind if Dinah gives you the go, you've deserved it. Never mind if the whole regiment laughs at you all day. Get shut of Judy and her mother. They can't drag you to church, but if they do, they'll drag you to hell. Go back to your quarters and lie down, says he. Thin, over his shoulder, you must ha' done with them. Next day, I went to see Dinah, but there was no tucker in me as I walked. I knew the trouble would come soon enough, without any handling of mine, and I dreaded it sore. I heard Judy calling, me, but I held straight on to the shad's quarters, and Dinah would have kissed me, but I held her back. When all's said, darling, says I, you can give it me if you will, though I misdoubt 'twill be so easy to come by thin. I had scarce begun to put the explanation into shape before Judy and her mother came to the door. I think there was a veranda, but I'm forgetting. Will you not step in? Says Dinah, pretty and polite, though the Shads had no dealings with the Sheehies. Old Mother Shad looked up quick, and she was the fuss to see the trouble, for Dinah was her daughter. I'm pressed for time today, says Judy, as bold as brass, and I've only come for Terence, my promised man. 'Tis strange to find him here the day after the day. Dinah looked at me as though I had hit her, and I answered straight. There was some nonsense last night at the Sheehies' quarters, and Judy's carrying on the joke, darling, says I. At the Sheehies' quarters? Says Dinah, very slow, and Judy cut in with, he was there from 9 till 10, Dinah Shad and I. The better half of that time I was sitting on his knee, Dinah Shad. Ye may look and ye may look and ye may look me up and down, but ye won't look away. That Terence is my promised man. Terence, darling, 'tis time for us to be coming home. Dinah Shad never said a word to Judy. Ye left me at 8:30, says she to me, and I never thought that ye'd leave me for Judy, promises or no promises. Go back with her? You, that have to be fetched by a girl. I'm done with you, says she, and she ran into her own room, her mother following. So I was alone with those two women, and at liberty to spake me sentiments. Judy Sheehy, says he, if you made a fool of me between the lights, you shall not do it in the day. I never promised you words or lines. You lie, sees would Mother Sheehy, and may I choke you where you stand. She was far gone in drink. And though it choked me where I stood, I'd not change, says he. Go home, Judy. I take shame for a decent girl like you, dragging your mother out bareheaded on this errand. Here now, and have it for an answer. I gave me word to Dinah Shadd yesterday, and more blame to me. I was with you last night talking nonsense, but nothing more. You've chosen to try to hold me or not. I will not be held thereby for anything in the world. Is that enough? Judy went pink all over. And I wish you joy of the perjury, says she. You've lost a woman that would have wore her hand to the bone for your pleasure. And 'deed, Terence, ye were not thrapped. Lascelles must have spoken plain to her. I am as such as Dinah is. 'Deed I am. Ye've lost a fool, have a girl that'll never look at you again, and ye've lost what ye niver had, your common honesty. If you manage your men as you manage your love-making, small wonder they call you the worst corporeal in the company. Come away, mother, says she, but divil a feut would the old woman budge. Do you hood by that? Says she, peering up under her thick grey eyebrows. Aye, and would, said I, though Dinah gave me the go 20 times. I'll have no thruck with you or yours, says I. Take your child away, ye shameless woman. And am I shameless, says she bringing, her hands up above her head. Thin? What are you, ye lying, shamming, weak-kneed, dirty-souled son of a sutler? Am I shameless? Who put the open shame on me, and my child, that we should go begging, though the line's in daylight, for the broken word of a man? Double portion of my shame be on you, Terence Mulvaney, that think yourself so strong. By Mary and the saints, by blood and water, and by ivory sorrow that came into the world since the beginning, the black blight fall on you and yours, so that you may never be free from pain for another when ut's not your own. May your heart bleed in your breast, drop by drop, wide all your friends laughing at the bleeding? Strong? You think yourself? May your strength be a curse to you, to drive you into the devil's hands against your own will. Clear-eyed you are? May your eyes see clear every step of the dark path you take, till the hot cinders of hell put them out. May the Reagan, dry thirst in my own, would bones go to you, that you shall never pass bottle full nor glass empty. God preserve the light of your understanding to you, my jewel of a boy, that ye may never forget what you meant to be and do when you're wallowing in the muck. May ye see the better and follow the worse as long as there's breath in your body, and may ye die quick in a strange land, watching your death before it takes you, and unable to stir hand or foot. I heard a scuffling in the room behind, and thin Dinah Shadd's hand dropped into mine like a rose-leaf into a muddy road. The half av that I'll take, says she, and more too if I can. Go home, ye silly talking woman, go home and confess. Come away, says Judy, pulling her mother by the shawl. 'Twas none of Terence's fault, for the love of Mary. Stop the talking. And you, said old Mother Sheehy, spinning round Fornin's Dinah, will ye take the half of that man's load? Stand off from him, Dinah Shadd, before he takes you down too. You that look to be a quartermaster, sergeant's wife in 5 years. Ye look too high, child. Ye shall wash for the quartermaster sergeant, when he pleases to give you the job out of charity. But a private's wife ye shall be to the end, and every sorrow of a private's wife ye shall know, and Never a joy but one, that shall go from you like the tide from a rock. The pain of bearing ye shall know, but never the pleasure of giving the breast. And you shall put away a man-child into the common ground, with never a priest to say a prayer over him. And on that man-child ye shall think every day of your life. Think long, Dinah Shad, for you'll never have another, though you pray till your knees are bleeding. The mothers of children shall mock you behind your back when you're ringing over the wash-tub. You shall know what it is to take a drunken husband home and see him go to the yard room. Will that please you, Dinah Shad, that won't be seen talking to my daughter? You shall talk to worse than Judy before all's over. The surgeon's wife shall look down on you, contemptuous daughter of a surgeon, and you shall cover it all up with a smiling face when your heart's bursting. Stand of him, Dinah Shad, for I've put the black curse of Shile upon him, and his own mouth shall make it good. She pitched forward on her head and began foaming at the mouth. Dinah Shad ran out with water, and Judy dragged the old woman into the veranda till she sat up. I'm old and forlorn, she sees, trembling and crying, and 'tis like I say, a dale more than I main. When you're able to walk, go, says old Mother Shad. This house has no place for the likes of you that have cursed my daughter. Iya, said the old woman, hard words break no bones, and Dinah Shad'll keep the love of her husband till my bones are green corn. Judy, darling, I misremember what I came here for. Can you lend us the bottom, have a take up of tea, Mrs. Shad? But Judy dragged her off, crying as though her heart would break, and Dinah Shad and I, in 10 minutes, we had forgot it all. Then why do you remember it now? Said I. Is that like I'd forget? Every word that wicked old woman spoke fell through in my life afterward, and I could have stood it all, except when little Shad was born. That was on the line a march 3 months after the regiment was taken, with cholera. We were between Umballa and Calcathin, and I was on picket. When I came off, the women showed me the child, and it turned on its side and died as I looked. We buried him by the road, and Father Victory was a day's march behind with the heavy baggage, so the company captain read prayer. And since then I've been a childless man, and all else that would Mother Sheehy put upon me and Dinah Shad. What do you think, Saw? I thought a good deal, but it seemed better then to reach out for Mulvaney's hand. This demonstration nearly cost me the use of 3 fingers. Whatever he knows of his weaknesses, Mulvaney is entirely ignorant of his strength. But what do you think? He insisted, as I was straightening out the crushed members. My reply was drowned in yells and outcries from the next fire, where 10 men were shouting for Authoress, Privet Authoress, Mr. Authoress, dear boy, Captain Authoress, Field Marshal Authoress. Stanley, you pen author pop, come here to your own company. And the Cockney, who had been delighting another audience with recondite and Rabelaisian yarns, was shot down among his admirers by the major force. You've crumpled my dress shirt. Horrid, said he, and I shan't sing no more to this here bloomin' drawing-room. Leroyd, roused by the confusion, uncoiled himself, crept behind Authoress, and raised him aloft on his shoulders. Sing, ye bloomin' hummin' bird, said he, and Authoress, beating time on Leroyd's skull, delivered himself, in the raucous voice of the Ratcliffe Highway, of the following chaste and touching ditty. My girl, she give me the go one set, when I was a London lad, and I went on the drunk for a fortnight, and then I went to the bad. The Queen, she gave me a shilling, to fight for her over the seas, but Gouvernement built me a fever trap, and Injia gave me disease. Chorus, ho! Don't you heed what a girl says, and don't you go for the beer, but I was an ass when I was a grass, and that is why I'm here. I fired a shot at an Afghan, the beggar he fired again, and I lay on my bed with a hole in my head. and missed the next campaign. I up with my gun at a Burman who carried a bloomin' dar, but the cartridge stuck and the bayonet broke, and all I got was the scar. Chorus, ho! Don't you aim at a Afghan when you stand on the skyline clear? And don't you go for a Burman. If none of your friends is near, I served my time for a corporal, and wetted my stripes with pop. For I went on the bend with a intimate friend, and finished the night in the shop. I served my time for a sergeant. The colonel? Shes. No. The most you'll be is a full CB. Some very next night 'twas so. Confined to barracks. Chorus, ho! Don't you go for a corporal, unless your eed is clear. But I was an ass when I was at grass, and that is why I am here. I've tasted the look of the army, in barrack and camp and clink, and I lost my tip through the bloomin' trip along. Oh, the women and drink! I'm down at the heel of my service, and when I am laid on the shelf, my very worst friend from beginning to end, by the blood of a mouse, was myself. Chorus, ho! Don't you heed what a girl says, and don't go for the beer. But I was an ass when I was at grass, and that is why I'm here. Aye, listen to our little man now, singing and shouting as though trouble had never touched him. Do you remember when he went mad with the homesickness? Said Mulvaney, recalling a never-to-be-forgotten season when Ortheris waded through the deep waters of affliction and behaved abominably. But he's talking the bitter truth, though. My very worst friend from beginning to end, by the blood of a mouse, was Misselfeet. Hark out, he continued, jumping to his feet. What did I tell you, so? Tell, spittle, pwittle, went the rifles of the picket in the darkness, and we heard their feet rushing toward us as Ortheris tumbled past me and into his greatcoat. It is an impressive thing, even in peace, to see an armed camp spring to life with clatter of accoutrements, click of martini levers, and blood-curdling speculations as to the fate of missing boots. Pickets driven in, said Mulvaney, staring like a bucket bay into the soft, slinging gloom. Stand by and cape close to us. If 'tis cavalry, they may blunder into the fires. Tierra-ra, tierra-la, sung the thrice-blessed bugle, and the rush to form square began. There is much rest and peace in the heart of a square, if you arrive in time and are not trodden upon too frequently. The smell of leather belts, fatigued uniform, and unpacked humanity is comforting. A dull grumble that seemed to come from every point of the compass at once struck our listening ears, and little thrills of excitement ran down the faces of the square. Those who write so learnedly about judging distance by sound should hear cavalry on the move at night. A high-pitched yell on the left told us that the disturbers were friends, the cavalry of the attack, who had missed their direction in the darkness, and were feeling blindly for some sort of support and camping ground. The difficulty explained, they jingled on. "Double pickets out there, by your arms lie down and sleep the rest," said the major, and the square melted away as the men scrambled for their places by the fires. When I woke, I saw Mulvaney, the night dew gemming his moustache, leaning on his rifle at picket, lonely as Prometheus on his rock, with I know not what vultures tearing his liver. The Sire to Meletrit's Door by R. L. Stevenson. Denis de Beaulieu was not yet 22, but he counted himself a grown man and a very accomplished cavalier into the bargain. Lads were early formed in that rough, warfaring epoch, and when one has been in a pitched battle and a dozen raids, has killed one's man in an honourable fashion, and knows a thing or two of strategy and mankind, a certain swagger in the gait is surely to be pardoned. He had put up his horse with due care and supped with due deliberation, and then, in a very agreeable frame of mind, went out to pay a visit in the grey of the evening. It was not a very wise proceeding on the young man's part. He would have done better to remain beside the fire or go decently to bed. For the town was full of the troops of Burgundy and England under a mixed command, and though Dennis was there on safe conduct, his safe conduct was like to serve him little on a chance encounter. It was September. The weather had fallen sharp. A flighty piping wind, laden with showers, beat about the township, and the dead leaves ran riot along the streets. Here and there a window was already lighted up, and the noise of men at arms making merry over supper within came forth in fits and was swallowed up and carried away by the wind. The night fell swiftly. The flag of England, fluttering on the spire top, grew ever fainter and fainter against the flying clouds, a black speck, like a swallow in the tumultuous, leaden chaos of the sky. As the night fell, the wind rose and began to hoot under archways and roar amid the treetops in the valley below the town. Dennis de Beaulieu walked fast and was soon knocking at his friend's door, but though he promised himself to stay only a little while and make an early return, his welcome was so pleasant, and he found so much to delay him, that it was already long past midnight before he said good-bye upon the threshold. The wind had fallen again in the meanwhile. The night was as black as the grave. Not a star, nor a glimmer of moonshine slipped through the canopy of cloud. Dennis was ill acquainted with the intricate lanes of Chateau Landon. Even by daylight he had found some trouble in picking his way, and in this absolute darkness he soon lost it altogether. He was certain of one thing, only to keep mounting the hill, for his friend's house lay at the lower end or tail of Chateau Landon, while the inn was up at the head under the great church spire. With this clue to go upon, he stumbled and groped forward, now breathing more freely in open places where there was a good slice of sky overhead, now feeling along the wall in stifling closes. It is an eerie and mysterious position to be thus submerged in opaque blackness in an almost unknown town. The silence is terrifying in its possibilities. The touch of cold window bars to the exploring hand startles the man. Like the touch of a toad, the inequalities of the pavement shake his heart into his mouth. A piece of denser darkness threatens an ambuscade or a chasm in the pathway, and where the air is brighter, the houses put on strange and bewildering appearances, as if to lead him further from his way. For Dennis, who had to regain his inn without attracting notice, there was real danger as well as mere discomfort in the walk, and he went warily and boldly at once, and at every corner paused to make an observation. He had been for some time threading a lane so narrow that he could touch a wall with either hand, when it began to open out and go sharply downward. Plainly, this lay no longer in the direction of his inn, but the hope of a little more light tempted him forward to reconnoitre. The lane ended in a terrace with a bartizan wall which gave an outlook between high houses as out of an embrasure into the valley lying dark and formless several hundred feet below. Dennis looked down and could discern a few treetops waving and a single speck of brightness where the river ran across a weir. The weather was clearing up, and the sky had lightened, so as to show the outline of the heavier clouds and the dark margin of the hills. By the uncertain glimmer, the house on his left hand should be a place of some pretensions. It was surmounted by several pinnacles and turret tops, the round stern of a chapel, with a fringe of flying buttresses projected boldly from the main block, and the door was sheltered under a deep porch carved with figures and overhung by two long gargoyles. The windows of the chapel gleamed through their intricate tracery with a light as of many tapers, and threw out the buttresses and the peaked roof in a more intense blackness against the sky. It was plainly the hotel of some great family of the neighbourhood, and as it reminded Dennis of a town-house of his own at Bourget, he stood for some time gazing up at it and mentally gauging the skill of the architects and the consideration of the two families. There seemed to be no issue to the terrace, but the lane by which he had reached it, he could only retrace his steps. But he had gained some notion of his whereabout, and hoped by this means to hit the main thoroughfare and speedily regain the inn. He was reckoning without that chapter of accidents, which was to make this night memorable above all others in his career, for he had not gone back above 100 yards before he saw a light coming to meet him, and heard loud voices speaking together in the echoing narrows of the lane. It was a party of men-at-arms going the night round with torches. Dennis assured himself that they had all been making free with the wine-bowl, and were in no mood to be particular about safe conducts or the niceties of chivalrous war. It was as like as not that they would kill him like a dog and leave him where he fell. The situation was inspiriting but nervous. Their own torches would conceal him from sight, he reflected, and he hoped that they would drown the noise of his footsteps with their own empty voices. If he were but fleet and silent, he might evade their notice altogether. Unfortunately, as he turned to beat a retreat, his foot rolled upon a pebble. He fell against the wall with an ejaculation, and his sword rang loudly on the stones. 2 or 3 voices demanded who went there, some in French, some in English. But Dennis made no reply and ran the faster down the lane. Once upon the terrace he paused to look back. They still kept calling after him, and just then began to double the pace in pursuit, with a considerable clank of armour and great tossing of the torchlight to and fro in the narrow jaws of the passage. Dennis cast a look around and darted into the porch. There he might escape observation, or, if that were too much to expect, was in a capital posture whether for parley or defence. So, thinking, he drew his sword and tried to set his back against the door. To his surprise, it yielded behind his weight, and though he turned in a moment, continued to swing back on oiled and noiseless hinges until it stood wide open on a black interior. When things fall out opportunely for the person concerned, he is not apt to be critical about the how or why, his own immediate personal convenience seeming a sufficient reason for the strangest oddities and resolutions in our sublunary things. And so Dennis, without a moment's hesitation, stepped within and partly closed the door behind him to conceal his place of refuge. Nothing was further from his thoughts than to close it altogether, but for some inexplicable reason, perhaps by a spring or a weight, the ponderous mass of oak whipped itself out of his fingers and clanked too, with a formidable rumble and a noise like the falling of an automatic bar. The round, at that very moment, debouched upon the terrace and proceeded to summon him with shouts and curses. He heard them ferreting in the dark corners. The stock of a lance even rattled along the outer surface of the door behind which he stood. But these gentlemen were in too high a humour to be long delayed, and soon made off down a corkscrew pathway which had escaped Dennis's observation, and passed out of sight and hearing along the battlements of the town. Dennis breathed again. He gave them a few minutes' grace for fear of accidents, and then groped about for some means of opening the door and slipping forth again. The inner surface was quite smooth, not a handle, not a moulding, not a projection of any sort. He got his fingernails round the edges and pulled, but the mass was immovable. He shook it. It was as firm as a rock. Dennis de Beaulieu frowned and gave vent to a little noiseless whistle. What ailed the door, he wondered. Why was it open? How came it to shut so easily and so effectually after him? There was something obscure and underhand about all this that was little to the young man's fancy. It looked like a snare, and yet who could suppose a snare in such a quiet by-street, and in a house of so prosperous and even noble an exterior? And yet snare or no snare, intentionally or unintentionally, here he was, prettily trapped, and for the life of him he could see no way out of it again. The darkness began to weigh upon him. He gave ear, all was silent without, but within and close by he seemed to catch a faint sighing, a faint sobbing rustle, a little stealthy creak, as though many persons were at his side, holding themselves quite still and governing even their respiration with the extreme of slyness. The idea went to his vitals with a shock, and he faced about suddenly as if to defend his life. Then, for the first time, he became aware of a light about the level of his eyes, and at some distance in the interior of the house, a vertical thread of light, widening toward the bottom, such as might escape between two wings of arras over a doorway. To see anything was a relief to Dennis. It was like a piece of solid ground to a man laboring in a morass. His mind seized upon it with avidity, and he stood staring at it and trying to piece together some logical conception of his surroundings. Plainly, there was a flight of steps ascending from his own level to that of this illuminated doorway, and indeed he thought he could make out another thread of light, as fine as a needle, and as faint as phosphorescence, which might very well be reflected along the polished wood of a handrail. Since he had begun to suspect that he was not alone, his heart had continued to beat with smothering violence, and an intolerable desire for action of any sort had possessed itself of his spirit. He was in deadly peril, he believed. What could be more natural than to mount the staircase, lift the curtain, and confront his difficulty at once? At least he would be dealing with something tangible. At least he would be no longer in the dark. He stepped slowly forward with outstretched hands until his foot struck the bottom step. Then he rapidly scaled the stairs, stood for a moment to compose his expression, lifted the arras, and went in. He found himself in a large apartment of polished stone. There were 3 doors, one on each of 3 sides, all similarly curtained with tapestry. The 4th side was occupied by 2 large windows and a great stone chimney-piece carved with the arms of the Maletroits. Dennis recognized the bearings and was gratified to find himself in such good hands. The room was strongly illuminated, but it contained little furniture except a heavy table and a chair or 2. The hearth was innocent of fire, and the pavement was but sparsely strewn with rushes clearly many days old. On a high chair beside the chimney, and directly facing Dennis as he entered, sat a little old gentleman in a fur tippet. He sat with his legs crossed and his hands folded, and a cup of spiced wine stood by his elbow on a bracket on the wall. His countenance had a strongly masculine cast, not properly human, but such as we see in the bull, the goat, or the domestic boar, something equivocal and wheedling, something greedy, brutal, and dangerous. The upper lip was inordinately full, as though swollen by a blow or a toothache, and the smile, the peaked eyebrows, and the small, strong eyes were quaintly and almost comically evil in expression. Beautiful white hair hung straight all round his head, like a saint's, and fell in a single curl upon the tippet. His beard and moustache were the pink of venerable sweetness. Age, probably in consequence of inordinate precautions, had left no mark upon his hands, and the Maletroit hand was famous. It would be difficult to imagine anything at once so fleshy and so delicate in design. The tapered, sensual fingers were like those of one of Leonardo's women. The fork of the thumb made a dimpled protuberance when closed. The nails were perfectly shaped and of a dead, surprising whiteness. It rendered his aspect tenfold more redoubtable. That a man with hands like these should keep them devoutly folded in his lap like a virgin martyr. That a man with so intense and startling an expression of face should sit patiently on his seat and contemplate people with an unwinking stare, like a god or a god statue. His quiescence seemed ironical and treacherous. It fitted so poorly with his looks. Such was Alain, Sire de Maletroit. Denis and he looked silently at each other for a second or 2. "Pray step in," said the Sieur de Maletroit. "I have been expecting you all the evening." He had not risen, but he accompanied his words with a smile and a slight but courteous inclination of the head. Partly from the smile, partly from the strange musical murmur with which the sire prefaced his observation, Denis felt a strong shudder of disgust go through his marrow. And what with disgust and honest confusion of mind, he could scarcely get words together in reply. "I fear," he said, "that this is a double accident. I am not the person you suppose me. It seems you were looking for a visit, but for my part, nothing was further from my thoughts. Nothing could be more contrary to my wishes than this intrusion." "Well, well," replied the old gentleman indulgently, "here you are, which is the main point. Seat yourself, my friend, and put yourself entirely at your ease. We shall arrange our little affairs presently." Denis perceived that the matter was still complicated with some misconception, and he hastened to continue his explanations. "Your door?" he began. "About my door?" asked the other, raising his peaked eyebrows. "A little piece of ingenuity." And he shrugged his shoulders. "A hospitable fancy. By your own account, you were not desirous of making my acquaintance. We old people look for such reluctance now and then, and when it touches our honor, we cast about until we find some way of overcoming it. You arrive uninvited, but believe me, very welcome." "You persist in error, sir," said Denis. "There can be no question between you and me. I am a stranger in this countryside. My name is Denis, Damoiseau de Bouilleux. If you see me in your house, it is only—" "My young friend," interrupted the other, "you will permit me to have my own ideas on that subject. They probably differ from yours at the present moment," he added with a leer, "but time will show which of us is in the right." Denis was convinced he had to do with a lunatic. He seated himself with a shrug, content to wait the upshot, and a pause ensued, during which he thought he could distinguish a hurried gabbling as of prayer from behind the arras immediately opposite him. Sometimes there seemed to be but one person engaged, sometimes two, and the vehemence of the voice, low as it was, seemed to indicate either great haste or an agony of spirit. It occurred to him that this piece of tapestry covered the entrance to the chapel he had noticed from without. The old gentleman meanwhile surveyed Denis from head to foot with a smile, and from time to time emitted little noises like a bird or a mouse, which seemed to indicate a high degree of satisfaction. This state of matters became rapidly insupportable, and Denis, to put an end to it, remarked politely that the wind had gone down. The old gentleman fell into a fit of silent laughter, so prolonged and violent that he became quite red in the face. Denis got upon his feet at once, and put on his hat with a flourish. "Sir," he said, "if you are in your wits, you have affronted me grossly. If you are out of them, I flatter myself. I can find better employment for my brains than to talk with lunatics. My conscience is clear. You have made a fool of me from the first moment. You have refused to hear my explanations, and now there is no power under. God will make me stay here any longer, and if I cannot make my way out in a more decent fashion, I will hack your door in pieces with my sword." The Sire de Maletroit raised his right hand and wagged it at Denis with the fore and little fingers extended. "My dear nephew," he said, "sit down." "Nephew," retorted Denis, "you lie in your throat." And he snapped his fingers in his face. "Sit down, you rogue," cried the old gentleman in a sudden harsh voice like the barking of a dog. "Do you fancy," he went on, "that when I had made my little contrivance for the door, I had stopped short with that? If you prefer to be bound hand and foot till your bones ache, rise and try to go away. If you choose to remain a free young buck, agreeably conversing with an old gentleman, why, sit where you are in peace, and God be with you." "Do you mean I am a prisoner?" demanded Denis. "I state the facts." replied the other. "I would rather leave the conclusion to yourself." Dennis sat down again. Externally he managed to keep pretty calm, but within he was now boiling with anger, now chilled with apprehension. He no longer felt convinced that he was dealing with a madman. And if the old gentleman was sane, what, in God's name, had he to look for? What absurd or tragical adventure had befallen him? What countenance was he to assume? While he was thus unpleasantly reflecting, the arras that overhung the chapel door was raised, and a tall priest in his robes came forth, and, giving a long, keen stare at Dennis, said something in an undertone to Sieur de Maletroit. "She is in a better frame of spirit?" asked the latter. "She is more resigned, messieurs," replied the priest. "Now, the Lord help her, she is hard to please," sneered the old gentleman. "A likely stripling, not ill-born and of her own choosing too? Why, what more would the jade have?" "The situation is not usual for a young damsel," said the other, and somewhat trying to her blushes. "She should have thought of that before she began the dance." "It was none of my choosing, God knows that, but since she is in it, by Our Lady, she shall carry it to the end." And then addressing Dennis, "Monsieur de Beaulieu," he asked, "may I present you to my niece? She has been waiting your arrival, I may say, with even greater impatience than myself." Dennis had resigned himself with a good grace. All he desired was to know the worst of it as speedily as possible, so he rose at once and bowed in acquiescence. The Sieur de Maletroit followed his example and limped, with the assistance of the chaplain's arm, toward the chapel door. The priest pulled aside the arras, and all three entered. The building had considerable architectural pretensions. A light groining sprang from 6 stout columns and hung down in 2 rich pendants from the center of the vault. The place terminated behind the altar in a round end, embossed and honeycombed with a superfluity of ornament in relief, and pierced by many little windows shaped like stars, trefoils, or wheels. These windows were imperfectly glazed, so that the night air circulated freely in the chapel. The tapers, of which there must have been 100 burning on the altar, were unmercifully blown about, and the light went through many different phases of brilliancy and semi-eclipse. On the steps in front of the altar, note a young girl richly attired as a bride. A chill settled over Dennis as he observed her costume. He fought with desperate energy against the conclusion that was being thrust upon his mind. It should not be as he feared. "Blanche," said the sire, in his most flute-like tones, "I have brought a friend to see you, my little girl. Turn round and give him your pretty hand. It is good to be devout, but it is necessary to be polite, my niece." The girl rose to her feet and turned toward the newcomers. She moved all of a piece, and shame and exhaustion were expressed in every line of her fresh young body. And she held her head down and kept her eyes upon the pavement as she came slowly forward. In the course of her advance, her eyes fell upon Denis de Beaulieu's feet, of which he was justly vain, be it remarked, and wore in the most elegant accoutrement even while travelling. She paused, started, as if his yellow boots had conveyed some shocking meaning, and glanced suddenly up into the wearer's countenance. Their eyes met. Shame gave place to horror and terror in her looks. The blood left her lips. With a piercing scream, she covered her face with her hands and sank upon the chapel floor. "That is not the man," she cried. "My uncle, that is not the man." The Sieur de Maletroit chirped agreeably. "Of course not," he said. "I expected as much. It was so unfortunate you could not remember his name." "Indeed," she cried, "indeed. I have never seen this person till this moment. I have never so much as set eyes upon him. I never wish to see him again. Sir," she said, turning to Dennis, "if you are a gentleman, you will bear me out. Have I ever seen you? Have you ever seen me before this accursed hour?" to speak for myself. "I have never had that pleasure," answered the young man. "This is the first time, Messier, that I have met with your engaging niece." The old gentleman shrugged his shoulders. "I am distressed to hear it," he said, "but it is never too late to begin. I had little more acquaintance with my own late lady ere I married her, which proves," he added with a grimace, "that these impromptu marriages may often produce an excellent understanding in the long run, as the bridegroom is to have a voice in the matter. I will give him 2 hours to make up for lost time before we proceed with the ceremony." And he turned toward the door, followed by the clergyman. The girl was on her feet in a moment. "My uncle, you cannot be in earnest," she said. "I declare before God I will stab myself rather than be forced on that young man. The heart rises at it. God forbids such marriages. You dishonor your white hair." "Oh, my uncle, pity me. There is not a woman in all the world but would prefer death to such a nuptial. Is it possible," she added, faltering, "is it possible that you do not believe me, that you still think this?" And she pointed at Dennis with a tremor of anger and contempt. "That you still think this to be the man?" "Frankly," said the old gentleman, pausing on the threshold, "I do. But let me explain to you once for all, Blanche de Malétroit, my way of thinking about this affair. When you took it into your head to dishonor my family and the name that I have borne, in peace and war, for more than 60 years, you forfeited not only the right to question my designs, but that of looking me in the face. If your father had been alive, he would have spat on you and turned you out of doors. His was the hand of iron. You may bless your God. You have only to deal with the hand of velvet, mademoiselle. It was my duty to get you married without delay. Out of pure goodwill, I have tried to find your own gallant for you, and I believe I have succeeded. But before God and all the holy angels, Blanche de Malétroit, if I have not, I care not one jackstraw. So let me recommend you to be polite to our young friend, for upon my word, your next groom may be less appetizing." And with that he went out, with the chaplain at his heels, and the arras fell behind the pair. The girl turned upon Dennis with flashing eyes. "And what, sir," she demanded, "may be the meaning of all this?" "God knows," returned Dennis gloomily. "I am a prisoner in this house, which seems full of mad people. More I know not, and nothing do I understand." "And pray how came you here?" she asked. He told her as briefly as he could. "For the rest," he added, "perhaps you will follow my example, and tell me the answer to all these riddles, and what, in God's name, is like to be the end of it." She stood silent for a little, and he could see her lips tremble and her tearless eyes burn with a feverish lustre. Then she pressed her forehead in both hands. "Alas, how my head aches," she said wearily, "to say nothing of my poor heart. But it is due to you to know my story, unmaidenly as it must seem. I am called Blanche de Malétroit. I have been without father or mother for as long as I can recollect, and indeed I have been most unhappy all my life. 3 months ago, a young captain began to stand near me every day in church. I could see that I pleased him. I am much to blame, but I was so glad that anyone should love me, and when he passed me a letter, I took it home with me and read it with great pleasure. Since that time, he has written many. He was so anxious to speak with me, poor fellow, and kept asking me to leave the door open some evening, that we might have 2 words upon the stair, for he knew how much my uncle trusted me." She gave something like a sob at that, and it was a moment before she could go on. "My uncle is a hard man, but he is very shrewd," she said at last. "He has performed many feats in war, and was a great person at court, and much trusted by Queen Isabeau in old days. How he came to suspect me I cannot tell, but it is hard to keep anything from his knowledge. And this morning, as we came from Mass, he took my hand in his, forced it open, and read my little billet, walking by my side all the while. When he had finished, he gave it back to me with great politeness. It contained another request to have the door left open, and this has been the ruin of us all. My uncle kept me strictly in my room until evening, and then ordered me to dress myself as you see me. A hard mockery for a young girl. Do you not think so? I suppose, when he could not prevail with me to tell him the young captain's name, he must have laid a trap for him, into which, alas, you have fallen in the anger of God. I looked for much confusion, for how could I tell whether he was willing to take me for his wife on these sharp terms? He might have been trifling with me from the first, or I might have made myself too cheap in his eyes. But truly I had not looked for such a shameful punishment as this. I could not think that God would let a girl be so disgraced before a young man. And now I have told you all, and I can scarcely hope that you will not despise me. Dennis made her a respectful inclination. "Madam," he said, "you have honored me by your confidence. It remains for me to prove that I am not unworthy of the honor. Is Monsieur de Maletroit at hand?" "I believe he is writing in the salle without," she answered. "May I lead you thither, madam?" asked Dennis, offering his hand with his most courtly bearing. She accepted it, and the pair passed out of the chapel, Blanche in a very drooping and shamefast condition, but Dennis strutting and ruffling in the consciousness of a mission and the boyish certainty of accomplishing it with honor. The Sieur de Maletroit rose to meet them with an ironical obeisance. "Sir," said Dennis, with the grandest possible air, "I believe I am to have some say in the matter of this marriage. And let me tell you at once, I will be no party to forcing the inclination of this young lady. Had it been freely offered to me, I should have been proud to accept her hand, for I perceive she is as good as she is beautiful. But as things are, I have now the honor, monsieur, of refusing." Blanche looked at him with gratitude in her eyes, but the old gentleman only smiled and smiled until his smile grew positively sickening to Dennis. "I am afraid," he said, "Monsieur de Beaulieu, that you do not perfectly understand the choice I have to offer you. Follow me, I beseech you, to this window." And he led the way to one of the large windows which stood open on the night. "You observe," he went on, "there is an iron ring in the upper masonry, and reeved through that a very efficacious rope. Now, mark my words, if you should find your disinclination to my niece's person insurmountable, I shall have you hanged out of this window before sunrise. I shall only proceed to such an extremity with the greatest regret, you may believe me. For it is not at all your death that I desire, but my niece's establishment in life. At the same time, it must come to that if you prove obstinate. Your family, Monsieur de Beaulieu, is very well in its way, but if you sprang from Charlemagne, you should not refuse the hand of a Maletroit with impunity. Not if she had been as common as the Pears Road, not if she was so hideous as the gargoyle over my door. Neither my niece nor you nor my own private feelings move me at all in this matter. The honor of my house has been compromised. I believe you to be the guilty person. At least you are now in the secret, and you can hardly wonder if I request you to wipe out the stain. If you will not, your blood be on your own head. It will be no great satisfaction to me to have your interesting relics kicking their heels in the breeze below my windows, but half a loaf is better than no bread, and if I cannot cure the dishonor, I shall at least stop the scandal." There was a pause. "I believe there are other ways of settling such imbroglios among gentlemen," said Dennis. "You wear a sword, and I hear you have used it with distinction." The Sire de Maletroit made a signal to the chaplain, Ku crossed the room with long, silent strides and raised the arras over the third of the 3 doors. It was only a moment before he let it fall again, but Dennis had time to see a dusky passage full of armed men. "When I was a little younger, I should have been delighted to honour you, Monsieur de Beaulieu," said Sire Elaine, "but I am now too old. Faithful retainers are the sinews of age, and I must employ the strength I have. This is one of the hardest things to swallow as a man grows up in years, but with a little patience, even this becomes habitual. You and the lady seem to prefer the salle for what remains of your 2 hours, and as I have no desire to cross your preference, I shall resign it to your use with all the pleasure in the world. No haste," he added, holding up his hand, as he saw a dangerous look come into Denis de Beaulieu's face. "If your mind revolts against hanging, it will be time enough, 2 hours hence, to throw yourself out of the window or upon the pikes of my retainers. 2 hours of life are always 2 hours. A great many things may turn up in even as little a while as that. And, besides, if I understand her appearance, my niece has still something to say to you. You will not disfigure your last hours by a want of politeness to a lady." Denis looked at Blanche, and she made him an imploring gesture. It is likely that the old gentleman was hugely pleased at this symptom of an understanding, for he smiled on both, and added sweetly, "If you will give me your word of honour, Monsieur de Beaulieu, to await my return at the end of the 2 hours before attempting anything desperate, I shall withdraw my retainers and let you speak in greater privacy with mademoiselle." Denis again glanced at the girl, who seemed to beseech him to agree. "I give you my word of honour," he said. Monsieur de Maletroit bowed, and proceeded to limp about the apartment, clearing his throat the while with that odd musical chirp which had already grown so irritating in the ears of Denis de Beaulieu. He first possessed himself of some papers which lay upon the table, then he went to the mouth of the passage and appeared to give an order to the men behind the arras, and lastly he hobbled out through the door by which Denis had come in, turning upon the threshold to address a last smiling bow to the young couple, and followed by the chaplain with a hand-lamp. No sooner were they alone than Blanche advanced toward Denis with her hands extended. Her face was flushed and excited, and her eyes shone with tears. "You shall not die," she cried. "You shall marry me after all." "You seem to think, madam," replied Denis, "that I stand much in fear of death." "Oh, no, no," she said. "I see you are no poltroon. It is for my own sake I could not bear to have you slain for such a scruple." "I am afraid," returned Denis, "that you underrate the difficulty, madam. What you may be too generous to refuse, I may be too proud to accept. In a moment of noble feeling toward me, you forget what you perhaps owe to others." He had the decency to keep his eyes upon the floor as he said this, and after he had finished, so as not to spy upon her confusion, she stood silent for a moment, then walked suddenly away, and falling on her uncle's chair, fairly burst out sobbing. Denis was in the acme of embarrassment. He looked round, as if to seek for inspiration, and seeing a stool, plumped down upon it for something to do. There he sat, playing with the guard of his rapier, and wishing himself dead 1,000 times over and buried in the nastiest kitchen heap in France. His eyes wandered round the apartment, but found nothing to arrest them. There were such wide spaces between the furniture. The light fell so boldly and cheerlessly over all. The dark outside air looked in so coldly through the windows, that he thought he had never seen a church so vast, nor a tomb so melancholy. The regular sobs of Blanche de Maletroit measured out the time like the ticking of a clock. He read the device upon the shield over and over again. Until his eyes became obscured, he stared into shadowy corners until he imagined they were swarming with horrible animals, and every now and again he awoke with a start, to remember that his last 2 hours were running and death was on the march. Oftener and oftener, as the time went on, did his glance settle on the girl herself. Her face was bowed forward and covered with her hands, and she was shaken at intervals by the convulsive hiccup of grief. Even thus she was not an unpleasant object to dwell upon, so plump and yet so fine, with a warm brown skin and the most beautiful hair, Dennis thought, in the whole world of womankind. Her hands were like her uncle's, but they were more in place at the end of her young arms, and looked infinitely soft and caressing. He remembered how her blue eyes had shone upon him, full of anger, pity, and innocence. And the more he dwelt on her perfections, the uglier death looked, and the more deeply was he smitten with penitence at her continued tears. Now he felt that no man could have the courage to leave a world which contained so beautiful a creature, and now he would have given 40 minutes of his last hour to have unsaid his cruel speech. Suddenly a hoarse and ragged peal of cockcrow rose to their ears from the dark valley below the windows, and this shattering noise in the silence of all around was like a light in a dark place, and shook them both out of their reflections. "Alas, can I do nothing to help you?" she said, looking up. "Madam," replied Dennis with a fine irrelevancy, "if I have said anything to wound you, believe me, it was for your own sake and not for mine." She thanked him with a tearful look. "I feel your position cruelly," he went on. "The world has been bitter hard on you. Your uncle is a disgrace to mankind. Believe me, madam, there is no young gentleman in all France but would be glad of my opportunity to die in doing you a momentary service." "I know already that you can be very brave and generous," she answered. "What I want to know is whether I can serve you now or afterward," she added with a quaver. "Most certainly," he answered with a smile. "Let me sit beside you as if I were a friend instead of a foolish intruder. Try to forget how awkwardly we are placed to one another. Make my last moments go pleasantly, and you do me the chief service possible." "You are very gallant," she added, with a yet deeper sadness. "Very gallant, and it somehow pains me. But draw nearer, if you please, and if you find anything to say to me, you will at least make certain of a very friendly listener." "Ah, Monsieur de Beaulieu," she broke forth. "Ah, Monsieur de Beaulieu, how can I look you in the face?" And she fell to weeping again with a renewed effusion. "Madam," said Dennis, taking her hand in both of his, "reflect on the little time I have before me, and the great bitterness into which I am cast by the sight of your distress. Spare me, in my last moments, the spectacle of what I cannot cure, even with the sacrifice of my life." "I am very selfish," answered Blanche. "I will be braver, Monsieur de Beaulieu, for your sake. But think if I can do you no kindness in the future, if you have no friends to whom I could carry your adieus. Charge me as heavily as you can. Every burden will lighten, by so little, the invaluable gratitude I owe you. Put it in my power to do something more for you than weep. My mother is married again, and has a young family to care for. My brother Guichard will inherit my fiefs, and if I am not in error, that will content him amply for my death. Life is a little vapour that passeth away, as we are told by those in holy orders. When a man is in a fair way, and sees all life open in front of him, he seems to himself to make a very important figure in the world. His horse whinnies to him. The trumpets blow, and the girls look out of window as he rides into town before his company. He receives many assurances of trust and regard, sometimes by express in a letter, sometimes face to face, with persons of great consequence falling on his neck. It is not wonderful if his head is turned for a time. But once he is dead, were he as brave as Hercules or as wise as Solomon, he is soon forgotten. It is not 10 years since my father fell, with many other knights around him, in a very fierce encounter, and I do not think that any one of them, nor so much as the name of the fight, is now remembered. No, no, madam. The nearer you come to it, you see that death is a dark and dusty corner, where a man gets into his tomb and has the door shut after him till the judgment day. I have few friends just now, and once I am dead, I shall have none. Ah, Monsieur de Beaulieu, she exclaimed, you forget Blanche de Malétroit. You have a sweet nature, madam, and you are pleased to estimate a little service far beyond its worth. It is not that, she answered. You mistake me if you think I am so easily touched by my own concerns. I say so because you are the noblest man I have ever met, because I recognize in you a spirit that would have made even a common person famous in the land. And yet here I die in a mousetrap with no more noise about it than my own squeaking, answered he. A look of pain crossed her face, and she was silent for a little while. Then a light came into her eyes, and with a smile she spoke again. I cannot have my champion think meanly of himself. Anyone who gives his life for another will be met in paradise by all the heralds and angels of the Lord God, and you have no such cause to hang your head. For I? Pray, do you think me beautiful? She asked with a flush. Indeed, madam, I do, he said. I am glad of that, she answered heartily. Do you think there are many men in France who have been in marriage by a beautiful maiden with her own lips and who have refused her to her face? I know you men would half despise such a triumph, but believe me, we women know more of what is precious in love. There is nothing that should set a person higher in his own esteem, and we women would prize nothing more dearly. You are very good, he said, but you cannot make me forget that I was asked in pity and not for love. I am not so sure of that, she replied, holding down her head. Hear me to an end, Monsieur de Beaulieu. I know how you must despise me. I feel you are right to do so. I am too poor a creature to occupy one thought of your mind, although, alas, you must die for me this morning. But when I asked you to marry me, indeed it was because I respected and admired you and loved you with my whole soul, from the very moment that you took my part against my uncle. If you had seen yourself and how noble you looked, you would pity rather than despise me. And now, she went on, hurriedly checking him with her hand, although I have laid aside all reserve and told you so much, remember that I know your sentiments toward me already. I would not, believe me, being nobly born, weary you with importunities into consent. I too have a pride of my own, and I declare before the Holy Mother of God, if you should now go back from your word already given, I would no more marry you than I would marry my uncle's groom. Dennis smiled a little bitterly. It is a small love, he said, that shies at a little pride. She made no answer, although she probably had her own thoughts. Come hither to the window, he said with a sigh. Here is the dawn. And indeed the dawn was already beginning. The hollow of the sky was full of essential daylight, colourless and clean, and the valley underneath was flooded with a grey reflection. A few thin vapours clung in the coves of the forest or lay along the winding course of the river. The scene disengaged a surprising effect of stillness, which was hardly interrupted when the cocks began once more to crow among the steadings. Perhaps the same fellow who had made so horrid a clangour in the darkness, not half an hour before, now sent up the merriest cheer to greet the coming day. A little wind went bustling and eddying among the treetops underneath the windows, and still the daylight kept flooding insensibly out of the east, which was soon to grow incandescent and cast up that red-hot cannonball, the rising sun. Dennis looked out over all this with a bit of a shiver. He had taken her hand and retained it in his almost unconsciously. "Has the day begun already?" she said, and then, illogically enough, "The night has been so long." "Alas, what shall we say to my uncle when he returns?" "What you will," said Dennis, and he pressed her fingers in his. She was silent. "Blanche," he said, with a swift, uncertain, passionate utterance, "you have seen whether I fear death. You must know well enough that I would as gladly leap out of that window into the empty air as lay a finger on you without your free and full consent. But if you care for me at all, do not let me lose my life in a misapprehension, for I love you better than the whole world, and though I will die for you blithely, it would be like all the joys of paradise to live on and spend my life in your service." As he stopped speaking, a bell began to ring loudly in the interior of the house, and a clatter of armour in the corridor showed that the retainers were returning to their post, and the 2 hours were at an end. "After all that you have heard?" she whispered, leaning toward him with her lips and eyes. "I have heard nothing," he replied. "The captain's name was Florimond de Champdivers," she said in his ear. "I did not hear it," he answered, taking her supple body in his arms and covering her wet face with kisses. A melodious chirping was audible behind, followed by a beautiful chuckle, and the voice of Messire de Malétroit wished his new nephew a good morning. The Secret of Gorsthorpe. Doyle. I am sure that nature never intended me to be a self-made man. There are times when I can hardly bring myself to realize that 20 years of my life were spent behind the counter of a grocer's shop in the East End of London, and that it was through such an avenue that I reached a wealthy independence and the possession of Gorsthorpe Grange. My habits are conservative, and my tastes refined and aristocratic. I have a soul which spurns the vulgar herd. Our family, the Dodds, date back to a prehistoric era, as is to be inferred from the fact that their advent into British history is not commented on by any trustworthy historian. Some instinct tells me that the blood of a crusader runs in my veins. Even now, after the lapse of so many years, such exclamations as "By a lady" rise naturally to my lips, and I feel that, should circumstances require it, I am capable of rising in my stirrups and dealing an infidel a blow, say, with a mace, which would considerably astonish him. Gorsthorpe Grange is a feudal mansion, or so it was termed in the advertisement which originally brought it under my notice. Its right to this adjective had a most remarkable effect upon its price, and the advantages gained may possibly be more sentimental than real. Still, it is soothing to me to know that I have slits in my staircase through which I can discharge arrows, and there is a sense of power in the fact of possessing a complicated apparatus by means of which I am enabled to pour molten lead upon the head of the casual visitor. These things chime in with my peculiar humour, and I do not grudge to pay for them. I am proud of my battlements and of the circular, uncovered sewer which girds me round. I am proud of my portcullis and donjon and keep. There is but one thing wanting to round off the medievalism of my abode, and to render it symmetrically and completely antique. Gorsthorpe Grange is not provided with a ghost. Any man with old-fashioned tastes and ideas as to how such establishments should be conducted would have been disappointed at the omission. In my case, it was particularly unfortunate, From my childhood, I had been an earnest student of the supernatural and a firm believer in it. I have revelled in ghostly literature, until there is hardly a tale bearing upon the subject which I have not perused. I learned the German language for the sole purpose of mastering a book upon demonology. When an infant, I have secreted myself in dark rooms in the hope of seeing some of those bogies with which my nurse used to threaten me, and the same feeling is as strong in me now as then. It was a proud moment when I felt that a ghost was one of the luxuries which my money might command. It is true that there was no mention of an apparition in the advertisement. On reviewing the mildewed walls, however, and the shadowy corridors, I had taken it for granted that there was such a thing on the premises. As the presence of a kennel presupposes that of a dog, so I imagined that it was impossible that such desirable quarters should be untenanted by one or more restless shades. Good heavens! What can the noble family from whom I purchased it have been doing these hundreds of years? Was there no member of it spirited enough to make away with his sweetheart, or take some other steps calculated to establish a hereditary spectre? Even now I can hardly write with patience upon the subject. For a long time I hoped against hope. Never did rat squeak behind the wainscot, or rain drip upon the attic floor, without a wild thrill shooting through me as I thought that at last I had come upon traces of some unquiet soul. I felt no touch of fear upon these occasions. If it occurred in the night time, I would send Mrs. Dodd, who is a strong-minded woman, to investigate the matter, while I covered up my head with the bedclothes and indulged in an ecstasy of expectation. Alas, the result was always the same. The suspicious sound would be traced to some cause so absurdly natural and commonplace that the most fervid imagination could not clothe it with any of the glamour of romance. I might have reconciled myself to this state of things had it not been for Jorrocks of Haverstock Farm. Jorrocks is a coarse, burly, matter-of-fact fellow whom I only happen to know through the accidental circumstance of his fields adjoining my demesne. Yet this man, though utterly devoid of all appreciation of archaeological unities, is in possession of a well-authenticated and undeniable spectre. Its existence only dates back, I believe, to the reign of the second George, when a young lady cut her throat upon hearing of the death of her lover at the Battle of Dettingen. Still, even that gives the house an air of respectability, especially when coupled with blood-stains upon the floor. Jorrocks is densely unconscious of his good fortune, and his language, when he reverts to the apparition, is painful to listen to. He little dreams how I covet every one of those moans and nocturnal wails which he describes with unnecessary objurgation. Things are indeed coming to a pretty pass when democratic spectres are allowed to desert the landed proprietors and annul every social distinction by taking refuge in the houses of the great. Unrecognized. I have a large amount of perseverance. Nothing else could have raised me into my rightful sphere, considering the uncongenial atmosphere in which I spent the earlier part of my life. I felt now that a ghost must be secured, but how to set about securing one was more than either Mrs. D. Odd or myself was able to determine. My reading taught me that such phenomena are usually the outcome of crime. What crime was to be done then, and who was to do it? A wild idea entered my mind that Watkins, the house steward, might be prevailed upon for a consideration to immolate himself or someone else in the interests of the establishment. I put the matter to him in a half-jesting manner, but it did not seem to strike him in a favourable light. The other servants sympathized with him in his opinion at least. I cannot account in any other way for their having left the house in a body the same afternoon. "My dear," Mrs. Dodd remarked to me one day after dinner, as I sat moodily sipping a cup of sack, "I love the good old names, my dear. That odious ghost of Jorrocks has been gibbering again. Let it gibber, I answered recklessly. Mrs. Dodd struck a few chords on her virginal and looked thoughtfully into the fire. I tell you what it is, Argentine, she said at last, using the pet name which we usually substitute for Silas. We must have a ghost sent down from London. How can you be so idiotic, Matilda? I remarked severely. Who could get us such a thing? My cousin, Jack Brockett, could, she answered confidently. Now, this cousin of Matilda's was rather a sore subject between us. He was a rakish, clever young fellow who had tried his hand at many things, but wanted perseverance to succeed at any. He was, at that time, in chambers in London, professing to be a general agent, and really living, to a great extent, upon his wits. Matilda managed so that most of our business should pass through his hands, which certainly saved me a great deal of trouble, but I found that Jack's commission was generally considerably larger than all the other items of the bill put together. It was this fact which made me feel inclined to rebel against any further negotiations with the young gentleman. "Oh, yes, he could," insisted Mrs. D., seeing the look of disapprobation upon my face. "You remember how well he managed that business about the crest?" "It was only a resuscitation of the old family coat of arms." "My dear," I protested. Matilda smiled in an irritating manner. "There was a resuscitation of the family portraits too, dear," she remarked. "You must allow that Jack selected them very judiciously. I thought of the long line of faces which adorned the walls of my banqueting hall, from the burly Norman robber, through every gradation of casque, plume, and ruff, to the sombre Chesterfieldian individual who appears to have staggered against a pillar in his agony at the return of a maiden MS, which he grips convulsively in his right hand. I was fain to confess that in that instance he had done his work well, and that it was only fair to give him an order with the usual commission for a family spectre, should such a thing be attainable. It is one of my maxims to act promptly when once my mind is made up. Noon of the next day found me ascending the spiral stone staircase which leads to Mister Spiral, Brockett's chambers, and admiring the succession of arrows and fingers upon the whitewashed wall, all indicating the direction of that gentleman's sanctum. As it happened, artificial aids of the sort were unnecessary, as an animated flap dance overhead could proceed from no other quarter, though it was replaced by a deathly silence as I groped my way up the stair. The door was opened by a youth, evidently astounded at the appearance of a client, and I was ushered into the presence of my young friend, who was writing furiously in a large ledger upside down, as I afterward discovered. After the first greetings, I plunged into business at once. "Look here, Jack," I said. "I want you to get me a spirit if you can." "Spirit, you mean?" shouted my wife's cousin, plunging his hand into the waste-paper basket and producing a bottle with the celerity of a conjuring trick. "Let's have a drink." I held up my hand as a mute appeal against such a proceeding so early in the day, but on lowering it again, I found that I almost involuntarily closed my fingers round the tumbler which my adviser had pressed upon me. I drank the contents hastily off, lest anyone should come in upon us and set me down as a toper. After all, there was something very amusing about the young fellow's eccentricities. "Not spirits," I explained smilingly. "An apparition, a ghost. If such a thing is to be had, I should be very willing to negotiate." "A ghost for Goresthorpe Grange?" inquired Mr. Brockett, with as much coolness as if I had asked for a drawing-room suite. "Quite so," I answered. "Easiest thing in the world," said my companion, filling up my glass again in spite of my remonstrance. "Let us see." Here he took down a large red notebook, with all the letters of the alphabet in a fringe down the edge. "A ghost, you said, didn't you? That's G. GG. Gems, gimlets, gas pipes, gauntlets, guns, galleys. Ah, here we are. Ghosts. Volume 9, Section 6, page 41. Excuse me? And Jack ran up a ladder and began rummaging among a pile of ledgers on a high shelf. I felt half inclined to empty my glass into the spittoon when his back was turned, but on second thoughts I disposed of it in a legitimate way. Here it is, cried my London agent, jumping off the ladder with a crash and depositing an enormous volume of manuscript upon the table. I have all these things tabulated, so that I may lay my hands upon them in a moment. It's all right, it's quite weak. Here, he filled our glasses again. What were we looking up again? Ghosts, I suggested. Of course, Page. Here we are. J. H. Fowler and Son, Dunkel Street, suppliers of mediums to the nobility and gentry, charms sold, love philters, mummies, horoscopes cast. Nothing in your line there, I suppose? I shook my head despondingly. Frederick Tabb, continued my wife's cousin, sole channel of communication between the living and the dead. Proprietor of the spirits of Byron, Kirkwhite, Grimaldi, Tom Cribb, and Inigo Jones. That's about the figure. Nothing romantic enough there, I objected. Good heavens! Fancy a ghost with a black eye and a handkerchief tied round its waist, or turning somersaults and saying, "How are you tomorrow?" The very idea made me so warm that I emptied my glass and filled it again. Here is another, said my companion. Christopher McCarthy. Bi-weekly seances attended by all the eminent spirits of ancient and modern times. Nativities, charms, abracadabras, messages from the dead. He might be able to help us. However, I shall have a hunt round myself tomorrow and see some of these fellows. I know their haunts, and it's odd if I can't pick up something cheap. So? There's an end of business, he concluded, hurling the ledger into the corner. And now we'll have something to drink. We had several things to drink, so many that my inventive faculties were dulled next morning, and I had some little difficulty in explaining to Mrs. Innersey, Dod, why it was that I hung my boots and spectacles upon a peg, along with my other garments, before retiring to rest. The new hopes, excited by the confident manner in which my agent had undertaken the commission, caused me to rise superior to alcoholic reaction, and I paced about the rambling corridors and old-fashioned rooms, picturing to myself the appearance of my expected acquisition, and deciding what part of the building would harmonize best with its presence. After much consideration, I pitched upon the banqueting hall as being, on the whole, most suitable for its reception. It was a long, low room, hung round with valuable tapestry and interesting relics of the old family to whom it had belonged. Coats of mail and implements of war glimmered fitfully as the light of the fire played over them, and the wind crept under the door, moving the hangings to and fro with a ghastly rustling. At one end there was the raised dais, on which in ancient times the host and his guests used to spread their table, while a descent of a couple of steps led to the lower part of the hall, where the vassals and retainers held wassail. The floor was uncovered by any sort of carpet, but a layer of rushes had been scattered over it by my direction. In the whole room there was nothing to remind one of the 19th century, except indeed my own solid silver plate, stamped with the resuscitated family arms, which was laid out upon an oak table in the centre. This, I determined, should be the haunted room, supposing my wife's cousin to succeed in his negotiation with the spirit-mongers. There was nothing for it now but to wait patiently until I heard some news of the result of his inquiries. A letter came in the course of a few days, which, if it was short, was at least encouraging. It was scribbled in pencil on the back of a playbill, and sealed apparently with a tobacco stopper. "Am on the track," it said. Nothing of the sort to be had from any professional spiritualist, but picked up a fellow in a pub yesterday who says he can manage it for you. Will send him down unless you wire to the contrary. Abrahams is his name, and he has done one or two of these jobs before. The letter wound up with some incoherent allusions to a cheque, and was signed by my affectionate cousin John Brockett. I need hardly say that I did not wire, but awaited the arrival of Mr. Abrahams with all impatience. In spite of my belief in the supernatural, I could scarcely credit the fact that any mortal could have such a command over the spirit world as to deal in them and barter them against mere earthly gold. Still, I had Jack's word for it that such a trade existed, and here was a gentleman with a Judaical name ready to demonstrate it by proof positive. How vulgar and commonplace Jorrocks' 18th century ghost would appear should I succeed in securing a real medieval apparition. I almost thought that one had been sent down in advance, for, as I walked round the moat that night before retiring to rest, I came upon a dark figure engaged in surveying the machinery of my portcullis and drawbridge. His start of surprise, however, and the manner in which he hurried off into the darkness speedily convinced me of his earthly origin, and I put him down as some admirer of one of my female retainers mourning over the muddy Hellespont which divided him from his love. Whoever he may have been, he disappeared and did not return, though I loitered about for some time in the hope of catching a glimpse of him and exercising my feudal rights upon his person. Jack Brockett was as good as his word. The shades of another evening were beginning to darken round Gorsthorpe Grange when a peal at the outer bell and the sound of a fly pulling up announced the arrival of Mr. Abrahams. I hurried down to meet him, half expecting to see a choice assortment of ghosts crowding in at his rear. Instead, however, of being the sallow-faced, melancholy-eyed man that I had pictured to myself, the ghost dealer was a sturdy little podgy fellow, with a pair of wonderfully keen, sparkling eyes, and a mouth which was constantly stretched in a good-humoured, if somewhat artificial, grin. His sole stock in trade seemed to consist of a small leather bag, jealously locked and strapped, which emitted a metallic clink upon being placed on the stone flags of the hall. "And how are you, sir?" he asked, wringing my hand with the utmost effusion. "And the missus, how is she? And all the others, how's all their health?" I intimated that we were all as well as could reasonably be expected, but Mr. Abrahams happened to catch a glimpse of Mrs. Dodd in the distance, and at once plunged at her with another string of inquiries as to her health, delivered so volubly, and with such an intense earnestness, that I half expected to see him terminate his cross-examination by feeling her pulse and demanding a sight of her tongue. All this time, his little eyes rolled round and round, shifting perpetually from the floor to the ceiling, and from the ceiling to the walls, taking in apparently every article of furniture in a single comprehensive glance. Having satisfied himself that neither of us was in a pathological condition, Mr. Abrahams suffered me to lead him upstairs, where a repast had been laid out for him to which he did ample justice. The mysterious little bag he carried along with him, and deposited it under his chair during the meal. It was not until the table had been cleared and we were left together that he broached the matter on which he had come down. "I understand," he remarked, puffing at a trichinopoly, "that you want my help in fitting up this here house with a apparition." I acknowledged the correctness of his surmise, while mentally wondering at those restless eyes of his, which still danced about the room as if he were making an inventory of the contents. "And you won't find a better man for the job, though I says it as shouldn't," continued my companion. "What did I say to the young gent? What spoke to me in the bar of the Lame Dog? 'Can you do it?' says he. 'Try me,' says I. 'Me and my bag. Just try me.' I couldn't say fairer than that. My respect for Jack Brocket's business capacities began to go up very considerably. He certainly seemed to have managed the matter wonderfully well. "You don't mean to say that you carry ghosts about in bags?" I remarked with diffidence. Abraham smiled, a smile of superior knowledge. "You wait," he said. "Give me the right place and the right hour with a little of the essence of Leucoptolicus." Here he produced a small bottle from his waistcoat pocket. "And you won't find no ghost that I ain't up to. You'll see them yourself and pick your own. And I can't say fairer than that." As all Mr. Abrahams's protestations of fairness were accompanied by a cunning leer and a wink from one or other of his wicked little eyes, the impression of candour was somewhat weakened. "When are you going to do it?" I asked reverentially. 10 minutes to 1 in the morning," said Mr. Abrahams with decision. "Some says midnight, but I says 10 to 1 when there ain't such a crowd and you can pick your own ghost. And now," he continued, rising to his feet, "suppose you trot me round the premises and let me see where you wants it, for there's some places as attracts them, and some as they won't hear of, not if there was no other place in the world." Mr. Abrahams inspected our corridors and chambers with a most critical and observant eye, fingering the old tapestry with the air of a connoisseur, and remarking in an undertone that it would match uncommon nice. It was not until he reached the banqueting hall, however, which I had myself picked out, that his admiration reached the pitch of enthusiasm. "There's the place!" he shouted, dancing, bag in hand, round the table on which my plate was lying, and looking not unlike some quaint little goblin himself. "There's the place! We won't get nothing to beat this." A fine room, noble, solid, none of your electroplate trash. That's the way as things ought to be done, sir. Plenty of room for 'em to glide here. Send up some brandy and a box of weeds. I'll sit here by the fire and do the preliminaries, which is more trouble than you think, for them ghosts carries on awful at times, before they finds out who they've got to deal with. If you was in the room, they'd tear you to pieces as like as not. You leave me alone to tackle them, and at 12:30 come in, and I'll lay they'll be quiet enough by then." Mr. Abrahams's request struck me as a reasonable one, so I left him with his feet upon the mantelpiece and his chair in front of the fire, fortifying himself with stimulants against his refractory visitors. From the room beneath, in which I sat with Mrs. Dodd, I could hear that after sitting for some time he rose up and paced about the hall with quick, impatient steps. We then heard him try the lock of the door, and afterward drag some heavy article of furniture in the direction of the window, on which, apparently, he mounted, for I heard the creaking of the rusty hinges as the diamond-paned casement folded backward, and I knew it to be situated several feet above the little man's reach. Mrs. Dodd says that she could distinguish his voice speaking in low and rapid whispers after this, but that may have been her imagination. I confess that I began to feel more impressed than I had deemed it possible to be. There was something awesome in the thought of the solitary mortal standing by the open window and summoning in from the gloom outside the spirits of the netherworld. It was with a trepidation which I could hardly disguise from Matilda that I observed that the clock was pointing to 12:30, and that the time had come for me to share the vigil of my visitor. He was sitting in his old position when I entered, and there were no signs of the mysterious movements which I had overheard, though his chubby face was flushed as with recent exertion. "Are you succeeding all right?" I asked as I came in, putting on as careless an air as possible, but glancing involuntarily round to see if we were alone. "Only your help is needed to complete the matter," said Mr. Abrahams in a solemn voice. "You shall sit by me and partake of the essence of Leucoptolicus, which removes the scales from our earthly eyes. Whatever you may chance to see, speak not and make no movement lest you break the spell." His manner was subdued, and his usual Cockney vulgarity had entirely disappeared. I took the chair, which he indicated, and awaited the result. My companion cleared the rushes from the floor in our neighbourhood, and going down upon his hands and knees, described a half-circle with chalk, which enclosed the fireplace and ourselves. Round the edge of this half-circle he drew several hieroglyphics, not unlike the signs of the zodiac. He then stood up and uttered a long invocation, delivered so rapidly that it sounded like a single gigantic word in some uncouth guttural language. Having finished this prayer, if prayer it was, he pulled out the small bottle which he had produced before, and poured a couple of teaspoonfuls of clear, transparent fluid into a vial, which he handed to me with an intimation that I should drink it. The liquid had a faintly sweet odour, not unlike the aroma of certain sorts of apples. I hesitated a moment before applying it to my lips, but an impatient gesture from my companion overcame my scruples, and I tossed it off. The taste was not unpleasant, and, as it gave rise to no immediate effects, I leaned back in my chair and composed myself for what was to come. Mr. Abraham seated himself beside me, and I felt that he was watching my face from time to time while repeating some more of the invocations in which he had indulged before. A sense of delicious warmth and languor began gradually to steal over me, partly, perhaps, from the heat of the fire, and partly from some unexplained cause. An uncontrollable impulse to sleep weighed down my eyelids, while, at the same time, my brain worked actively, and 100 beautiful and pleasing ideas flitted through it. So utterly lethargic did I feel that, though I was aware that my companion put his hand over the region of my heart, as if to feel how it was beating, I did not attempt to prevent him, nor did I even ask him for the reason of his action. Everything in the room appeared to be reeling slowly round in a drowsy dance, of which I was the centre. The great elk's head at the far end wagged solemnly backward and forward, while the massive salvers on the tables performed cotillon with the claret cooler and the épergne. My head fell upon my breast from sheer heaviness, and I should have become unconscious had I not been recalled to myself by the opening of the door at the other end of the hall. This door led on to the raised dais, which, as I have mentioned, the heads of the house used to reserve for their own use. As it swung slowly back upon its hinges, I sat up in my chair, clutching at the arms and staring with a horrified glare at the dark passage outside. Something was coming down. It's something unformed and intangible, but still a something. Dim and shadowy, I saw it flit across the threshold, while a blast of ice-cold air swept down the room, which seemed to blow through me, chilling my very heart. I was aware of the mysterious presence, and then I heard it speak in a voice like the sighing of an east wind among pine trees on the banks of a desolate sea. It said, "I am the invisible non-entity. I have affinities and am subtle. I am electric, magnetic, and spiritualistic. I am the great ethereal Psi-Heaver. I kill dogs. Mortal, wilt thou choose me?" I was about to speak, but the words seemed to be choked in my throat, and before I could get them out, the shadow flitted across the hall and vanished in the darkness at the other side, while a long-drawn, melancholy sigh quivered through the apartment. I turned my eyes toward the door once more, and beheld, to my astonishment, a very small old woman, who hobbled along the corridor and into the hall. She passed backward and forward several times, and then, crouching down at the very edge of the circle upon the floor, she disclosed a face, the horrible malignity of which shall never be banished from my recollection. Every foul passion appeared to have left its mark upon that hideous countenance. "Ha! Ha!" she screamed, holding out her wizened hands like the talons of an unclean bird. "You see what I am? I am the fiendish old woman. I wear snuff-coloured silks. My curse descends on people. Sir Walter was partial to me. Shall I be thine, mortal? I endeavoured to shake my head in horror, on which she aimed a blow at me with her crutch and vanished with an eldritch scream. By this time, my eyes turned naturally toward the open door, and I was hardly surprised to see a man walk in, of tall and noble stature. His face was deathly pale, but was surmounted by a fringe of dark hair which fell in ringlets down his back. A short, pointed beard covered his chin. He was dressed in loose-fitting clothes, made apparently of yellow satin, and a large white ruff surrounded his neck. He paced across the room with slow and majestic strides. Then turning, he addressed me in a sweet, exquisitely modulated voice. "I am the cavalier," he remarked. "I pierce and am pierced. Here is my rapier. I clink steel. This is a bloodstain over my heart. I can emit hollow groans. I am patronized by many old conservative families. I am the original manor house apparition. I work alone, or in company with shrieking damsels." He bent his head courteously, as though awaiting my reply, but the same choking sensation prevented me from speaking, and, with a deep bow, he disappeared. He had hardly gone before a feeling of intense horror stole over me, and I was aware of the presence of a ghastly creature in the room, of dim outlines and uncertain proportions. One moment it seemed to pervade the entire apartment, while at another it would become invisible, but always leaving behind it a distinct consciousness of its presence. Its voice, when it spoke, was quavering and gusty. It said, "I am the lever of footsteps and the spiller of gouts of blood. I tramp upon corridors. Charles Dickens has alluded to me. I make strange and disagreeable noises. I snatch letters and place invisible hands on people's wrists. I am cheerful. I burst into peals of hideous laughter. Shall I do one now?" I raised my hand in a deprecating way, but too late to prevent one discordant outbreak which echoed through the room. Before I could lower it, the apparition was gone. I turned my head toward the door in time to see a man come hastily and stealthily into the chamber. He was a sunburned, powerfully built fellow, with earrings in his ears and a Barcelona handkerchief tied loosely round his neck. His head was bent upon his chest, and his whole aspect was that of one afflicted by intolerable remorse. He paced rapidly backward and forward like a caged tiger, and I observed that a drawn knife glittered in one of his hands, while he grasped what appeared to be a piece of parchment in the other. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and sonorous. He said, "I am a murderer. I am a ruffian. I crouch when I walk. I step noiselessly. I know something of the Spanish Main. I can do the lost treasure business. I have charts. Am able-bodied and a good walker, capable of haunting a large park." He looked toward me beseechingly, but before I could make a sign, I was paralyzed by the horrible sight which appeared at the door. It was a very tall man, if, indeed, it might be called a man, for the gaunt bones were protruding through the corroding flesh, and the features were of a leaden hue. A winding sheet was wrapped round the figure, and formed a hood over the head, from under the shadow of which two fiendish eyes, deep set in their grisly sockets, blazed and sparkled like red-hot coals. The lower jaw had fallen upon the breast, disclosing a withered, shriveled tongue and two lines of black and jagged fangs. I shuddered and drew back as this fearful apparition advanced to the edge of the circle. "I am the American blood-curdler," it said, in a voice which seemed to come in a hollow murmur from the earth beneath it. "None other is genuine. I am the embodiment of Edgar Allan Poe. I am circumstantial and horrible. I am a low caste, spirit-subduing spectre. Observe my blood and my bones. I am grisly and nauseous. No depending on artificial aid. Work with grave clothes, a coffin lid, and a galvanic battery. Turn hair white in a night. The creature stretched out its fleshless arms to me as if in entreaty, but I shook my head, and it vanished, leaving a low, sickening, repulsive odor behind it. I sank back in my chair, so overcome by terror and disgust that I would have very willingly resigned myself to dispensing with a ghost altogether. Could I have been sure that this was the last of the hideous procession? A faint sound of trailing garments warned me that it was not so. I looked up and beheld a white figure emerging from the corridor into the light. As it stepped across the threshold, I saw that it was that of a young and beautiful woman, dressed in the fashion of a bygone day. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and her pale, proud face bore traces of passion and of suffering. She crossed the hall with a gentle sound, like the rustling of autumn leaves, and then, turning her lovely and unutterably sad eyes upon me, she said, "I am the plaintive and sentimental, the beautiful and ill-used. I have been forsaken and betrayed. I shriek in the night time and glide down passages. My antecedents are highly respectable and generally aristocratic. My tastes are aesthetic. Old oak furniture like this would do, with a few more coats of mail and plenty of tapestry. Will you not take me?" Her voice died away in a beautiful cadence as she concluded, and she held out her hands as in supplication. I am always sensitive to female influences. Besides, what would Jorrocks but ghost be to this? Could anything be in better taste? Would I not be exposing myself to the chance of injuring my nervous system by interviews with such creatures as my last visitor? Unless I decided at once. She gave me a seraphic smile, as if she knew what was passing in my mind. That smile settled the matter. "She will do!" I cried. "I choose this one." And as, in my enthusiasm, I took a step toward her, I passed over the magic circle which had girdled me round. "Argentine, we have been robbed." I had an indistinct consciousness of these words being spoken, or rather screamed, in my ear, a great number of times without my being able to grasp their meaning. A violent throbbing in my head seemed to adapt itself to their rhythm, and I closed my eyes to the lullaby of "Robbed! Robbed! Robbed!" A vigorous shake caused me to open them again, however, and the sight of Mrs. Dodd, in the scantiest of costumes and most furious of tempers, was sufficiently impressive to recall all my scattered thoughts and make me realize that I was lying on my back on the floor, with my head among the ashes which had fallen from last night's fire, and a small glass vial in my hand. I staggered to my feet, but felt so weak and giddy that I was compelled to fall back into a chair. As my brain became clearer, stimulated by the exclamations of Matilda, I began gradually to recollect the events of the night. There was the door through which my supernatural visitors had filed. There was the circle of chalk, with the hieroglyphics round the edge. There was the cigar box and brandy bottle, which had been honoured by the attentions of Mr. Abrahams. But the seer himself, where was he? And what was this open window, with a rope running out of it? And where, oh, where, was the pride of Gorsthorpe Grange, the glorious plate which was to have been the delectation of generations of Dodds? And why was Mrs. D standing in the grey light of dawn, wringing her hands and repeating her monotonous refrain? It was only very gradually that my misty brain took these things in and grasped the connection between them. Reader, I have never seen Mr. Abraham since. I have never seen the plate stamped with the resuscitated family crest. Hardest of all, I have never caught a glimpse of the melancholy spectre with the trailing garments, nor do I expect that I ever shall. In fact, my night's experiences have cured me of my mania for the supernatural, and quite reconciled me to inhabiting the humdrum 19th-century edifice on the outskirts of London, which Mrs. D has long had in her mind's eye. As to the explanation of all that occurred, that is a matter which is open to several surmises. That Mr. Abrahams, the ghost hunter, was identical with Jemmy Wilson, alias the Nottingham Crackster, is considered more than probable at Scotland Yard, and certainly the description of that remarkable burglar tallied very well with the appearance of my visitor. The small bag which I have described was picked up in a neighbouring field next day, and found to contain a choice assortment of jimmies and centre bits. Footmarks, deeply imprinted in the mud on either side of the moat, showed that an accomplice from below had received the sack of precious metals which had been let down through the open window. No doubt the pair of scoundrels, while looking round for a job, had overheard Jack Brocket's indiscreet inquiries, and had promptly availed themselves of the tempting opening. And now, as to my less substantial visitors, and the curious, grotesque vision which I had enjoyed, am I to lay it down to any real power over occult matters possessed by my Nottingham friend? For a long time I was doubtful upon the point, and eventually endeavoured to solve it by consulting a well-known analyst and medical man, sending him the few drops of the so-called essence of Leucoptolicus which remained in my vial. I append the letter which I received from him, only too happy to have the opportunity of winding up my little narrative by the weighty words of a man of learning. Arundel Street, dear sir, your very singular case has interested me extremely. The bottle which you sent contained a strong solution of chloral, and the quantity which you describe yourself as having swallowed must have amounted to at least 80 grains of the pure hydrate. This would, of course, have reduced you to a partial state of insensibility, gradually going on to complete coma. In this semi-unconscious state of chloralism, it is not unusual for circumstantial and bizarre visions to present themselves, more especially to individuals unaccustomed to the use of the drug. You tell me in your note that your mind was saturated with ghostly literature, and that you had long taken a morbid interest in classifying and recalling the various forms in which apparitions have been said to appear. You must also remember that you were expecting to see something of that very nature, and that your nervous system was worked up to an unnatural state of tension. Under the circumstances, I think that, far from the sequel being an astonishing one, it would have been very surprising indeed to anyone versed in narcotics had you not experienced some such effects. I remain, dear sir, sincerely yours, T.E. Stube, M.D. Argentine. Esc. The Elms, Brixton. A Change of Treatment by W. W. Jacobs, from Many Cargoes. Yes, I've sailed under some cute skippers in my time, said the night watchman. Them that go down in big ships see the wonders o' the deep, you know, he added with a sudden chuckle. But the one I'm going to tell you about ought never to have been trusted out without Isma. A good many of my skippers had fads, but this one was the worst I ever sailed under. It's some few years ago now I'd shipped on his bark, the John Elliot, as slow-going an old tub as ever I was aboard of, when I wasn't in quite a fit and proper state to know what I was doing, and I hadn't been in her 2 days afore I found out his hobby through overhearing a few remarks made by the second mate, who came up from dinner in a hurry to make 'em. I don't mind saws and knives hung round the cabin, he says to the fuss mate, but when a chap has a human, and alongside his plate, studying it while folks is at their food, it's more than a Christian man can stand. That's nothing, says the first mate, who had sailed with the bark afore. He's half crazy on doctoring. We nearly had a mutiny aboard once, owing to his wanting to hold a post-mortem on a man what fell from the masthead. Wanted to see what the poor feller died of. I call it unwholesome, says the second mate, very savage. He offered me a pill at breakfast the size of a small marble. Quite put me off my feed, it did. Of course, the skipper's fad soon got known for hard. But I didn't think much about it, till one day I seed old Daniel Dennis sitting on a locker reading. Every now and then he'd shut the book and look up, closing his eyes and moving his lips like a hen drinking, and then look down at the book again. "Why, Dan," I says, "what's up? You ain't larning lessons at your time of life." "Yes, I am," says Dan, very soft. "You might hear me say it. It's this one about heart disease." He hands over the book, which was stuck full of all kinds of diseases, and winks at me hard. Picked it up on a bookstall, Then he shut his eyes and said his piece wonderful. It made me quite queer to listen to him. "That's how I feel," says he, when he'd finished. "Just strength enough to get to bed, lend a hand, Bill, and goin'. Fetch the doctor." Then I see his little game, but I wasn't going to run any risks, so I just mentioned, promiscuous-like, to the cook, as old Dan seemed rather queer, and went back and tried to borrow the book, being always fond of reading. Old Dan pretended he was too ill to hear what I was saying, and before I could take it away from him, the skipper comes hurrying down with a bag in his hand. "What's the matter, my man?" says he. "What's the matter?" "I'm all right, sir," says old Dan, "'cept that I've been swooning away a little." "Tell me exactly how you feel," says the skipper, feeling his pulse. Then old Dan said his piece over to him, and the skipper shook his head and looked very solemn. "How long have you been like this?" he says. "4 or 5 years." "Sir?" says Dan. "It ain't nothing serious, sir, is it?" "You lie quite still," says the skipper, putting a little trumpet thing to his chest and then listening. There's serious mischief here, I'm afraid. The prognosis is very bad." "Prog? What, sir?" says Dan, staring. "Prognosis," says the skipper. "At least I think that's the word he said. You keep perfectly still, and I'll go and mix you up a draught and tell the cook to get some strong beef tea on." Well, the skipper had no sooner gone than Cornish Harry, a great big lumbering chap of 6 feet 2, goes up to old Dan, and he says, "Gimme that book." "Go away," says Dan. "Don't come worrying here. You heard the skipper say how bad my prognosis was. You lend me the book," says Harry, catching hold of him, "or else I'll bang you first," and split to the skipper afterward. I believe I'm a bit consumptive. Anyway, I'm going to see. He dragged the book away from the old man and began to study. There were so many complaints in it, he was almost tempted to have something else instead of consumption, but he decided on that at last, and he got a cough. What worried the forecastle all night long, and the next day, when the skipper came down to see Dan, he could hardly hear himself speak. "That's a nasty cough you've got, my man," says he, looking at Harry. "Oh, it's nothing, sir," says Harry, careless like. "I've had it for months now, off and on. I think it's perspiring so. Of a night does it." "What?" says the skipper. "Do you perspire of a night?" "Dreadful," says Harry. "You could wring the clothes out. I suppose it's healthy for me, ain't it, sir?" "Undo your shirt," says the skipper, going over to him and sticking the trumpet agin him. "Now take a deep breath. Don't cough." "I can't help it, sir," says Harry. "It will come. Seems to tear me to pieces." "You get to bed at once," says the skipper, taking away the trumpet and shaking his head. "It's a fortunate thing for you, my lad. You're in skilled hands. With care, I believe I can pull you round. How does that medicine suit you, Dan?" "Beautiful, sir," says Dan. "It's wonderful soothing. I slept like a newborn babe arter it." "I'll send you to get some more," says the skipper. "You're not to get up, mind. Either of you." "All right, sir," seized the two in very faint voices, and the skipper went away after telling us to be careful not to make a noise. We all thought it a fine joke at first, but the airs them two chaps give themselves was something sickening. Being in bed all day, they was naturally wakeful of a night, and they used to call across the forecastle inquiring arter each other's healths and waking us other chaps up. And they had swapped beef tea and jellies with each other. Dan'd try and coax a little port wine out of Harry, which he had to make blood with, but Harry'd say he hadn't made enough that day, and he'd drink to the better health of old Dan's prognotis and smack his lips until it drove us most crazy to hear him. After these chaps had been ill 2 days, the other fellas began to put their heads together, being maddened by the smell of beef tea and the like, and said they was going to be ill too, and both the invalids got into a fearful state of excitement. "You'll only spoil it for all of us," says Harry, "and you don't know what to have without the book." "It's all very well doing your work as well as our own," says one of the men. "It's our turn now. It's time you two got well." "Well?" says Harry. "Well? Why, you silly ignorant chaps, we shan't never get well. People with our complaints never do. You ought to know that." "Well, I shall split," says one of them. "You do," says Harry. "You do, and I'll put a head on you that all the port wine and jellies in the world wouldn't cure. Sides, don't you think the skipper knows what's the matter with us?" Afore the other chaps could reply, the skipper himself comes down, accompanied by the first mate, with a look on his face which made Harry give the deepest and hollowest cough he'd ever done. "What they really want," says the skipper, turning to the mate, "is careful nussing." "I wish you'd let me nuss 'em," says the first mate. "Only 10 minutes I'd put 'em both on their legs, and running for their lives into the bargain in 10 minutes. "Hold your tongue, sir," says the skipper. "What you say is unfeeling, besides being an insult to me. Do you think I studied medicine all these years without knowing when a man's ill? Illustration, W. W. Jacobs." The first mate growled something and went on deck, and the skipper started examining of him again. He said there was wonderfully patient lying in bed so long, and he had him wrapped up in bedclothes and carried on deck, so as the pure air could have a go at 'em. We had to do the carrying, and there they sat, breathing the pure air, and looking at the first mate out of the corners of their eyes. If they wanted anything from below, one of us had to go and fetch it, and by the time they was taken down to bed again, we all resolved to be took ill too. Only 2 of 'em did it, though, for Harry, who was a powerful, ugly-tempered chap, swore he'd do all sorts of dreadful things to us if we didn't keep well and hearty, and all except these 2 did. One of 'em, Mike Rafferty, laid up with a swelling on his ribs, which I knew myself he had had for 15 years, and the other chap had paralysis. I never saw a man so really happy as the skipper was. He was up and down with his medicines and his instruments all day long, and used to make notes of the cases in a big pocket-book, and read 'em to the second mate at meal-times. The forecastle had been turned into hospital about a week, and I was on deck doing some odd job or the other, when the cook comes up to me pulling a face as long as a fiddle. "'Nother invalid,' says he. First mate's gone stark, staring mad." "Mad?" says I. "Yes," says he. "He's got a big basin in the galley, and he's laughing like a hyena and mixing bilge water and ink, and paraffin and butter and soap and all sorts of things up together. The smell's enough to kill a man. I've had to come away." Curious like, I just walked up to the galley and puts my head in, and there was the mate, as the cook said, smiling all over his face, and ladling some thick sticky stuff into a stone bottle. "How's the poor sufferers, sir?" says he, stepping out of the galley just as the skipper was going by. "They're very bad, but I hope for the best," says the skipper, looking at him hard. "I'm glad to see you're turned a bit more feeling." "Yes, sir," says the mate. "I didn't think so at first, but I can see now them chaps is all very ill. "You'll excuse me saying it, but I don't quite approve of your treatment." I thought the skipper would have bust. "My treatment?" says he. "My treatment? What do you know about it?" "You're treating 'em wrong, sir," says the mate. "I have here," patting the jar, "a remedy which would cure them all if you'd only let me try it." "Pooh," says the skipper. "One medicine cure all diseases." The old story. What is it? "Where'd you get it from?" says he. "I brought the ingredients aboard with me," says the mate. "It's a wonderful medicine discovered by my grandmother, and if I might only try it, I'd thoroughly cure them poor chaps." "Rubbish," says the skipper. "Very well, sir," says the mate, shrugging his shoulders. "Of course, if you won't let me, you won't. Still, I tell you, if you let me try, I'd cure 'em all in 2 days. That's a fair challenge." Well, they talked and talked and talked, until at last the skipper give way and went down below with the mate and told the chaps they was to take the new medicine for 2 days, just to prove the mate was wrong. "Let poor old Dan try it first, sir," says Harry, starting up and sniffing as the mate took the cork out. "He's been awful bad since you've been away." "Harry's worse than I am, sir," says Dan. "It's only his kind heart that makes him say that." "It don't matter which is first," says the mate, filling a tablespoon with it. "There's plenty for all. Now, Harry." "Take it," says the skipper. Harry took it, and the fuss he made you'd thought he was swallowing a football. It stuck all round his mouth, and he carried on so dreadful that the other invalids was half sick afore it came to them. By the time the other 3 had theirs, it was as good as a pantomime, and the mate corked the bottle up and went and sat down on a locker while they tried to rinse their mouths out with the luxuries which had been given 'em. "How do you feel?" says the skipper. "I'm dying," says Dan. "So am I," says Harry. "I believe the mate's poisoned us." The skipper looks over at the mate, very stern, and shakes his head slowly. "It's all right," says the mate. "It's always like that, the first dozen or so doses." "Dozen or so doses," says old Dan in a faraway voice. "It has to be taken every 20 minutes, says the mate, pulling out his pipe and lighting it, and the 4 men groaned all together. "I can't allow it," says the skipper. "I can't allow it. Men's lives mustn't be sacrificed for an experiment." "'Tain't a experiment," says the mate, very indignant. "It's an old family medicine." "Well, they shan't have any more," says the skipper firmly. "Look here," says the mate. "If I kill any one of these men, I'll give you £20. Honour bright, I will." "Make it 25, says the skipper, considering. "Very good," says the mate. "25. I can't say no fairer than that, can I? It's about time for another dose now." He gave 'em another tablespoonful all round as the skipper left, and the chaps what wasn't invalids nearly bust with joy. He wouldn't let 'em have anything to take the taste out, 'cause he said it didn't give the medicine a chance, and he told us other chaps to remove the temptation, and you bet we did. After the 5th dose, the invalids began to get desperate, and when they heard they'd got to be woke up every 20 minutes through the night to take the stuff, they sort of give up. Old Dan said he felt a gentle glow stealing over him and strengthening him, and Harry said that it felt like a healing balm to his lungs. All of 'em agreed it was a wonderful sort of medicine, and after the 6th dose, the man with paralysis dashed up on deck and ran up the rigging like a cat. He sat there for hours spitting, and swore he'd brain anybody who interrupted him, and arter a little while, Mike Rafferty went up and joined him, and if the first mate's ears didn't burn by reason of the things them 2 poor sufferers said about him, they ought to. They was all doing full work next day, and though, of course, the skipper saw how he'd been done, he didn't allude to it, not in words, that is, But when a man tries to make 4 chaps do the work of 8 and hits them when they don't, it's a easy job to see where the shoe pinches. The Stick-It Minister. The Renunciation of a Robert Fraser, formerly student in divinity. The crows were wheeling behind the plough in scattering clusters and plumping singly upon the soft, thick grubs which the ploughshare was turning out upon an unkindly world. It was a barsk, blowy day in the end of March, and there was a hint of storm in the air, a hint emphasized for those skilled in weather lore by the presence of 6 seagulls, white vagrants among the black coats, blown by the south wind up from the Solway, a snell, Scotch, but not unfriendly day altogether. Robert Fraser bent to the plough handles and cast a keen and wary eye towards his guideposts on the ridge. His face was colourless, even when a dash of rain came swirling across from the crest of Ben Ghan, whose steep bulk heaved itself a blue haystack above the level horizon of the moorland. He was dressed like any other ploughman of the South Uplands, rough homespun, much the worse for wear, and leggings the colour of the red soil which he was reversing with the share of his plough. Yet there was that about Robert Fraser which marked him no common man. When he paused at the top of the ascent and stood with his back against the horns of the plough, the countryman's legacy from Adam of the Mattock, he pushed back his weather-beaten straw hat with a characteristic gesture and showed a white forehead with blue veins channeling it, a damp, heavy lock of black hair clinging to it as in Seven's picture of John Keats on his deathbed. Robert Fraser saw a couple of black specks which moved smoothly and evenly along the top of the distant dike of the highway. He stood still for a moment or two watching them. As they came nearer, they resolved themselves into a smart young man sitting in a well-equipped gig drawn by a showily actioned hone and driven by a man in livery. As they passed rapidly along the road, the hand of the young man appeared in a careless wave of recognition over the stone dike, and Robert Fraser lifted his slack reins in staid acknowledgment. It was more than a year since the brothers had looked each other so nearly in the eyes. They were Dr. Sell, Henry Fraser, the rising physician of Carn Edward, and his elder brother Robert, once student of divinity at Edinburgh College, whom 3 parishes knew as the Stick-It Minister. When Robert Fraser stabled his horses that night and went into his supper, he was not surprised to find his friend Saunders Macier of Drumquat sitting by the peat fire in the room. Almost the only thing which distinguished the Stick-It Minister from the other small farmers of the parish of Dulag was the fact that he always sat in the evening by himself, Ben, the hoose, and did not use the kitchen in common with his housekeeper and herd boy, save only at mealtimes. Robert had taken to Saunders ever since the back of his ambition broken. He had settled down to the farm, and he welcomed him with shy cordiality. "You'll take a cup of tea, Saunders?" he asked. "Thank ye, Robert. I wadna be warrant," returned his friend. "I saw your brither the day," said Saunders Macier, after the teacups had been cleared away, and the silent housekeeper had replaced the books upon the table. Saunders picked a couple of them up, and, having adjusted his glasses, he read the titles, Milton's Works, and a volume of a translation of Dorner's Person of Christ. "I saw your brither the day. He maun be getting a big practice." "Aye," said Robert Fraser, very thoughtfully. "Saunders?" Macier glanced up quickly. It was, of course, natural that the unsuccessful elder brother should envy the prosperous younger, but he had thought that Robert Fraser was living on a different plane. It was one of the few things that the friends had never spoken of, though everyone knew why Dr. Fraser did not visit his brother's little farm. "He's getting in with the big folk noo, Anne. Thinks maybe that his brither wad do him nae credit." That was the way the clash of the countryside explained the matter. "I never told you how I came to leave the college, Saunders," said the younger man, resting his brow on a hand that even the horn of the plough could not make other than diaphanous. "No," said Saunders quietly, with a tender gleam coming into the humoursome kindly eyes that lurked under their bushy tussocks of grey eyebrow. Saunders's humour lay near the fountain of tears. "No," continued Robert Fraser, "I have not spoken of it to so many, but you've been a good friend to me, Saunders, and I think you should hear it. I have not tried to set myself right with folks in the general, but I would like to let you see clearly before I go my ways to him who seeth from the beginning." "Here till him," said Saunders, "man, your host is no. Near as sair as it was I the back end. Ye'll be here lang after me, but lang or short, weel do ye ken, Robert Fraser, that ye need not to pitch ye're so rich with me. Hey, I no kenned ye since ye war, the sicko twa scrubbers." "I thank you, Saunders," said Robert, "but I am well aware that I'm to die this year. No, no, not a word. It is the Lord's will. It's mair than 7 year now since I first kenned that my days were to be few. It was the year my father died, and left Harry and me by our lane. He left no siller to speak of, just plenty to lay him decently in the kirkyard among his forebears. I had been a year at the Divinity Hall then, and was going up to put in my discourses for the next session. I had been troubled with my breast for some time, and so called one day at the infirmary to get a word with Sir James. He was very busy when I went in, and never noticed me till the host took me. Then on a sudden he looked up from his papers, came quickly over to me, put his own white handkerchief to my mouth, and quietly said, 'Come into my room, laddie.' Aye, he was a good man, and a faithful Sir James, if ever there was one. He told me that with care I might live 5 or 6 years, but it would need great care. Then a strange, prickly coldness came over me, and I seemed to walk light-headed in an atmosphere suddenly rarefied. I think I know now how the mouse feels under the air-pump." "What's that?" queried Saunders. "A cruel ploy not worth speaking of," continued the stickit minister. "Well, I found something in my throat when I tried to thank him. But I came my ways home to the Dullarg, and night and day I considered what was to be done. With so much to do, and so little time to do it, it was clear that both Harry and me could not gang through the college on the little my father had left. So late one night I saw my way clear to what I should do. Harry must go, I must stay. I must come home to the farm and be my own man. Then I could send Harry to the college to be a doctor, for he had no call to the ministry as once I thought I had. More than that, it was laid on me to tell Jessie London that Robert Fraser was no better than a machine set to go 5 year. Now all these things I did, Saunders, but there's no use telling you what they cost in the doing. They were right to do, and they were done. I do not repent any of them. I would do them all over again were they to do, but it's been bitterer than I thought." The stickit minister took his head off his hand and leaned wearily back in his chair. "The story went over the country that I had failed in my examinations, and I never said that I had not. But there were some that knew better who might have contradicted the report if they had liked. I settled down to the farm, and I put Harry through the college, sending all but a bare living to him in Edinburgh. I worked the work of the farm, rain and shine, ever since, and have been for these 6 years the stickit minister that all the world kens the day." Whilst Harry did not think that he got enough, he was always writing for more, and not so very pleased when he did not get it. He was aye different to me, ye ken, Saunders, and he cannot be judged by the same standard as you and me. "I ken," said Saunders Macier, a spark of light lying in the quiet of his eyes. "Well," continued Robert Fraser, lightened by Saunders's apparent agreement, "the time came when he was clear from the college, and wanted a practice. He had been ill-advised that he had not got his share of the farm, and he wanted it sold to share and share alike. Now I kenned, and you ken, Saunders, that it's no worth much in one share, let alone two. So I got the place quietly bonded, and bought him old Dr. Aitken's practice in Cairn Edward with the money. I have tried to do my best for the lad, for it was laid on me to be my brother's keeper. He doesna come here much, continued Robert, but I think he's not so ill against me as he was. Saunders, he waved his hand to me when he was gone by the day. That was kind of him, said Saunders McKeer. Aye, was it no? Said the stickit minister eagerly, with a soft look in his eyes as he glanced up at his brother's portrait in cap and gown, which hung over the china dogs on the mantelpiece. I got my notice this morning that the bond is to be called up in November, said Robert, so I'll be obliged to flit. Saunders McKeer started to his feet in a moment. Never, he said, with the spark of fire alive now in his eyes. Never as lang as there's a beast on Drumquat or a pound in Cairn. Edward Bank bringing down his clenched fist upon the Milton on the table. No, Saunders, no, said the stickit minister very gently. I thank you kindly, but I'll be flitted before that. The Lammers Preaching by S. R. Crockett. And I further intimate, said the minister, that I will preach this evening at Caldshaws, and my text will be from the 9th chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes and the 10th verse. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. Save us, said Janet MacTaggart. He's clean forgotten, if it be the Lord's wool. Maybe he'll be forgone, whether it's his wool or no. He's a sair masterful man, the minister. But he comes frae the Mashars, and kens little aboot the jealous god. We high amang the hills o' Galloway, the eastern lowlands of Wintonshire. The minister continued, in the same high, level tone in which he did his preaching. There are a number of sluggards who lay the weight of their own laziness on the Almighty, saying, I am a worm, and no man. How should I strive with my Maker? Whenever they are at strife with their own sluggishness, there will be a word for all such this evening at the farm town of Caldshaws, presently occupied by Gilbert McKissick. Public worship to begin at 7 o'clock. The congregation of Barnesock Kirk tumbled amicably over its own heels with eagerness to get into the kirkyard in order to settle the momentous question, was he on the day? Robert Kirk, Castlethorne, had a packet of peppermint lozenges in the crown of his lum hat, deponed to by Elizabeth Douglas, or Barr, in Barnbugry, whose husband, Wheelum Barr, put on the hat of the aforesaid Robert Kirk by mistake for his own, whereupon the peppermints fell to the floor and rolled under the pews in most unseemly fashion. Elizabeth Kirk is of opinion that this should be brought to the notice of session, she herself always taking her peppermint while genteelly wiping her mouth with the corner of her handkerchief. Robert Kirk, on being put to the question, admits the fact, but says that it was his wife put them there to be near her hand. The minister, however, ready with his word, brought him to shame by saying, "O Robert, Robert, that was just what Adam said, the woman thou gavest me, she gave me to eat. The aforesaid Robert Kirk thinks that it is meddling with the original Hebrew to apply this to peppermints, and also says that Elizabeth Kirk is an impudent besom, and furthermore that, as all the country well knows, here the chronicler omits much matter actionable in the civil courts of the realm." "Janet," said the minister to his housekeeper, "I am to preach tonight at Caldshaws on the text, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might." "I ken," said Janet. "I saw it on your desk. I patted to blow the clock for fear the ones who even micht blow it all were like chaff, and you couldn't do want in it." "Janet MacTaggart," said the minister tartly, "bring in the dinner, and do not meddle with what does not concern you." Janet could not abide. Read sermons. Her natural woman rose against them. She knew, as she had said, that God was a jealous God, and, with regard to the minister, she looked upon herself as his vice-regent. "He's young and terrible ram-stam and opinionated for obiclair, but with little gracious experience. For a' that, the root of the mate is in him," said Janet, not unhopefully. "I'm going to preach at Coleshaws, and my texts. 'Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might,' said the minister to the precentor that afternoon on the manse doorstep. "The Lord's no, inna his thocks." "I'll gang with the lad mysel'," said the precentor. "Now, Galloway is so much out of the world that the Almighty has not there lifted his hand from reward and punishment, from guiding and restraining, as he has done in big towns where everything goes by machinery. Man may say that there is no God when he only sees a handbreadth of smoky heaven between the chimney-pots, but out on the fields of oats and bare, and up on the screes of the hillsides, where the mother granite sticks her bleaching ribs through the heather, men have reached great assurance on this and other matters. The burns were running red with the mighty July rain when Douglas MacLellan started over the meadows and moors to preach his sermon at the farm town of Coleshaws. He had thanked the Lord that morning in his opening prayer for the bounteous rain wherewith he had seen meet to refresh his weary heritage. His congregation silently acquiesced. "For what," said they, "could a man from the Mashars be expected to ken about meadow hay?" When the minister and the precentor got to the foot of the manse loaning, they came upon the parish ne'er-do-weel, E.B. Kiergan, who kept himself in employment by constantly scratching his head, trying to think of something to do, and whose clothes were constructed on the latest sanitary principles of ventilation. The ruins of E.B.'s hat were usually tipped over one eye for enlarged facilities of scratching in the rear. "If it's your wool, minister, I'll come to hear ye the nicht. It's drawing to mair rain, I'm thinking," said the scarecrow. "I hope the discourse may be profitable to you, Ebenezer, for, as I intimated this morning, I am to preach from the text, 'Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might.'" "Aye, minister," said E.B., relieving his right hand, and tipping his hat over the other eye to give his left free play. So, the three struck over the fields, making for the thorn tree at the corner, where Robert Kirk's dyke dipped into the standing water of the meadow. "Do you think ye can manage it, Maister MacLellan?" said the precentor. "Ye what, half-way up the leg already? And there's 6 feet of black moss water in the Lameburn, as sure as I'm a leaving soul," added E.B. Kurgan. "I'm to preach at Coleshaws, and my text is, 'Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might,'" said the minister, stubbornly glooming from under the eaves of his eyebrows, as the swarthy men from the Machars are wont to do. His companion said no more. They came to Camelon Lane, where usually Robert Kirk had a leaping pole on either bank to assist the traveller across, but both poles had gone down the water in the morning to look for Robert's meadow hay. "Take care, Maister MacLellan, you'll be in deep water afore ye ken." "Oh, man, he had far better turn." The precentor stood up to his knees in water on what had once been the bank and wrung his hands, but the minister pushed steadily ahead into the turbid and sluggish water. "I canna come, oh, I canna come, for I'm a man that has a family." "It's no your work." "Stay where ye are," cried the minister, without looking over his shoulder. "But as for me, I'm intimated to preach this night at Coleshaws, and my text—" Here he stepped into a deep hole, and his text was suddenly shut within him by the gurgle of moss water in his throat. His arms rose above the surface like the black spars of a windmill. But E.B. Kiergan sculled himself swiftly out, swimming with his shoeless feet, and pushed the minister before him to the further bank, the water gushing out of rents in his clothes as easily as out of the gills of a fish. The minister stood with unshaken confidence on the bank. He ran peat water like a spout in a thunder plump, and black rivulets of dye were trickling from under his hat down his brow and dripping from the end of his nose. "Then you'll not come any farther?" he called cross to the precentor. "I canna, oh, I canna, though I'm most awful woolin'. Kirsty wad never forgie me gin I was to droon. Then I'll e'en have to raise the tune myself, though 3 times. Kilmarnock is a pity," said the minister, turning on his heel and striding away through the shallow sea, splashing the water as high as his head with a kind of headstrong glee which seemed to the precentor a direct defiance of Providence. Ebbie Kurgan followed 6 steps behind. The support of the precentor's lay semi-equality taken from him, he began to regret that he had come, and silently and ruefully plunged along after the minister through the water-logged meadows. They came in time to the foot of Robert Kirk's March Dyke, and skirted it 100 yards upward to avoid the deep pool in which the Laneburn waters were swirling. The minister climbed silently up the 7-foot dyke, pausing a second on the top to balance himself for his leap to the other side. As he did so, Ebbie Kurgan saw that the dyke was swaying to the fall, having been weakened by the rush of water on the farther side. He ran instantly at the minister and gave him a push with both hands, which caused Mr. McClellan to alight on his feet, clear of the falling stones. The dyke did not so much fall outward as settle down on its own ruins. Ebbie fell on his face among the stones with the impetus of his own eagerness. He arose, however, quickly, only limping slightly from what he called a bit chacks on the leg between 2 stones. "That was a merciful providence, Ebenezer," said the minister solemnly. "I hope you are duly thankful." "Dod, I am that," replied Ebbie, scratching his head vigorously with his right hand and rubbing his leg with his left. "Gin, I hadna gien near that dunch ye make the preachin' nene at Cold Shores this night." They now crossed a fairly level clover field, dark and laid with wet. The scent of the clover rose to their nostrils with almost overpowering force. There was not a breath of air. The sky was blue and the sun shining. Only a sullen roar came over the hill, sounding in the silence like the rush of a train over a faraway viaduct. "What is that?" queried the minister, stopping to listen. Ebbie took a brisk sidelong look at him. "I'm some dootsome. That'll be the Skyburn coming doon off a Cairnsmuir." The minister tramped unconcernedly on. Ebbie Kurgan stared at him. He canna ken what a Skyburn warning is. He'll be thinking it's some bit much as burn that the laddies set their whirly mills in. But he'll turn recht Enoch when he sees Skyburn roaring reed in a lammer's flood, I'm thinking. They took their way over the shoulder of the hill in the beautiful evening, leaning eagerly forward to get the first glimpse of the cause of that deep and resonant roar. In a moment they saw below them a narrow rock-walled gully, 10 or 15 yards across, filled to the brim with rushing water. It was not black peat water like the Camelon Lane, but it ran red as keel, flecked now and then with a revolving white blur as one of the Coldshore sheep spun downward to the sea with 4 black feet turned pitifully up to the blue sky. Ebbie looked at the minister. "He'll turn noo if he's mortal," he said, but the minister held on. He looked at the water up and down the roaring stream. On a hill above, the farmer of Coldshores, having driven all his remaining sheep together, sat down to watch. Seeing the minister, he stood up and excitedly waved him back. But Douglas McClellan from the Matchers never gave him a look, and his shouting was of less effect than if he had been crying to an untrained collie. The minister looked long up the stream, and at a point where the rocks came very close together and many stunted pines were growing, he saw one which, having stood on the immediate brink had been so much undercut that it leaned over the gully like a fishing rod. With a keen glance along its length, the minister, jamming his dripping soft felt hat on the back of his head, was setting foot on the perilous slope of the uneven red-brown trunk, when Ebbe Kurgan caught him sharply by the arm. "It's no for me to speak to a minister at ordinary times," he stammered, gathering courage in his desperation. "But, oh man, it's fair murder to try to gang ower that water." The minister wrenched himself free and sprang along the trunk with wonderful agility. "I am intimated to preach at Coleshaws this night, and my text is, 'Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might,'" he shouted. He made his way up and up the slope of the fir tree, which, having little grip of the rock, dipped and swayed under his tread. Ebbe Kurgan fell on his knees and prayed aloud. He had not prayed since his stepmother boxed his ears for getting into bed without saying his prayers 20 years ago. This had set him against it. But he prayed now, and to infinitely more purpose than his minister had recently done. But when the climber had reached the branchy top and was striving to get a few feet farther, in order to clear the surging Lynn before he made his spring, Ebbe rose to his feet, leaving his prayer unfinished. He sent forth an almost animal shriek of terror. The tree roots cracked like breaking cables and slowly gave way. An avalanche of stones plumped into the whirl, and the top of the fir crashed downwards on the rocks of the opposite bank. "Oh man, call on the name of the Lord!" cried Ebbe Kurgan, the ragged preacher, at the top of his voice. Then he saw something detach itself from the tree as it rebounded, and for a moment rise and fall black against the sunset. Then Ebbe the outcast fell on his face like a dead man. In the white coverleted room of the farm town of Coleshaws, a white-faced lad lay with his eyes closed, and a wet cloth on his brow. A large-boned, red-cheeked, motherly woman stole to and fro with a foot as light as a fairy. The sleeper stirred and tried to lift an unavailing hand to his head. The mistress of Coleshaws stole to his bedside as he opened his eyes. She laid a restraining hand on him as he strove to rise. "Let me up," said the minister. "I must away, for I'm intimated to preach at Coleshaws, and my text is, 'Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might.'" "My bonny man," said the goodwife tenderly, "you'll preach best on the broad o' your back this mony a day, and when ye rise, your best text will be, 'He sent from above, he took me, and drew me out of many waters.'" An Undergraduate's Aunt by F. Arnstein, author of Vice Versa, etc. Frederick Flushington belonged to a small college, and in doing so conferred upon it one of the few distinctions it could boast, namely, that of possessing the very bashfulest man in the whole university. But his college did not treat him with any excess of adulation on that account, probably from a prudent fear of rubbing the bloom off his modesty. They allowed him to blush unseen, which was the condition in which he preferred to blush. He felt himself oppressed by a paucity of ideas and a difficulty in knowing which way to look in the presence of his fellow men, which made him never so happy as when he had fastened his outer door and secured himself from all possibility of intrusion, though it was almost an unnecessary precaution, for nobody ever thought of coming to see Flushington. In appearance he was a man of middle height, with a long, scraggy neck and a large head, which gave him the air of being much shorter than he really was. He had little, weak eyes, a nose and mouth of no particular shape, and very smooth hair of no definite colour. He had a timid, deprecating air, which seemed due to the consciousness that he was an uninteresting anomaly. And he certainly was as impervious to the ordinary influence of his surroundings as any undergraduate well could be. He lived a colourless, aimless life in his little rooms under the roof, reading every morning from 9 till 2 with a superstitiously mechanical regularity, though very often his books completely failed to convey any ideas whatever to his brain, which was not a particularly powerful organ. If the afternoon was fine, he generally sought out his one friend, who was a few degrees less shy than himself, and they took a monosyllabic walk together, or, if it was wet, he read the papers at the Union, and in the evening after hall he studied general literature, a graceful term for novels, or laboriously spelt out a sonata upon his piano, a habit which did not increase his popularity. Fortunately for Flushington, he had no jip, or his life might have been made a positive burden to him, and with his bedmaker he was rather a favourite as a gentleman. What gave no trouble, meaning that, when he observed his sherry unaccountably sinking like the water in a lock when the sluices are up, Flushington was too delicate to refer to the phenomenon. He was sitting one afternoon over his modest lunch of bread and butter, potted meat and lemonade, when all at once he heard a sound of unusual voices and a strange flutter of dresses coming up the winding stone staircase outside, and was instantly seized with a cold dread. There was no particular reason for being alarmed, although there were certainly ladies mounting the steps. Probably they were friends of the man opposite, who was always having his people up. But still, Flushington had that odd presentiment which nervous people have sometimes, that something unpleasant is on its way to them, and he half rose from his chair to shut his outer oak. It was too late. The dresses were rustling now in his very passage. There was a pause, a few faint, smothered laughs and little feminine coughs, then 2 taps at the door. "Come in!" cried Flushington faintly. He wished he had been reading anything but the work by M. Zola, which was propped up in front of him. "It is your mild man who frequently has a taste for seeing the less reputable side of life in this second-hand way," and Flushington would toil manfully through the voluminous pages, hunting up every 3rd word in the dictionary, with a sense of injury, when, as was often the case, it was not to be found. Still, there was a sort of intellectual orgy about it which had strong fascinations for him. While he knew enough of the language to be aware when the incidents approached the improper, though he was not always able to see quite clearly in what this impropriety consisted, the door opened, and his heart seemed to stop, and all the blood rushed violently to his head as a large lady came sweeping in, her face rippling with a broad smile of affection. She horrified Flushington, who knew nobody with the least claim to smile at him so expansively as that. He drank lemonade to conceal his confusion. "You know me, my dear Fred," she said easily. "Of course not. How should you? I'm for goodness sake, my dear boy. Don't look so terribly frightened. I'm your Aunt Amelia, come over from Australia." The shock was a severe one to Flushington, who had not even known he possessed such a relative. He could only say, "Oh," which he felt even then was scarcely a warm greeting to give an aunt from the Antipodes. "Oh, but," she added cheerily, "that's not all. I've another surprise for you. The dear girls would insist on coming up, too, to see their Grand College cousin. They're just outside. I'll call them in, shall I?" In another second, Flushington's small room was overrun by a horde of female relatives, and he looked on gasping. They were pretty girls, too, many of them. But that was all the more dreadful to him. He did not mind the plainer ones half so much. A combination of beauty and intellect reduced him to a condition of absolute imbecility. He was once caught and introduced to a charming young lady from Newnham, and all he could do was to back feebly into a corner and murmur, "Thank you," repeatedly. He was very little better than that then, as his aunt singled out one girl after another. "We won't have any formal nonsense between cousins," she said. "You know them all by name already, I dare say. This is Milly, that's Jane, here's Flora and Kitty and Margaret, and that's my little Thomasina over there by the bookcase." Poor Flushington ducked blindly in the direction of each, and then to them all collectively he had not presence of mind to offer them chairs or cake or anything. And besides, there was not nearly enough of anything for all of them. Meanwhile, his aunt had spread herself comfortably out in his armchair, and was untying her bonnet strings and beaming at him until he was ready to expire with confusion. "I do think," she observed at last, "that when an old aunt all the way from Australia takes the trouble to come and see you like this, you might spare her just one kiss." Flushington dared not refuse. He tottered up and kissed her somewhere about the face, after which he did not know which way to look. He was so terribly afraid that he might have to go through the same ceremony with his cousins, which he simply could not have survived. Happily for him, they did not appear to expect it, and he balanced a chair on its hind legs, and, resting one knee upon it, waited patiently for them to begin a conversation. He could not have uttered a single word. The aunt came to his rescue. "You don't ask after your Uncle Samuel, who used to send you the beetles," she said reprovingly. "No," said Flushington, who had forgotten Uncle Samuel and his beetles too. "No. How is Uncle Samuel? Quite well, I hope?" "Only tolerably so, thank you, Fred. You see, he never got over his great loss." "No," said Flushington desperately. "Of course not. It was a large sum of money to lose at once." "I was not referring to money," said she, with a slight touch of stodiness in her manner. "I was alluding to the death of your cousin John." Flushington had felt himself getting on rather well just before that, but this awkward mistake, for he could not recollect having heard of cousin John before, threw him off his balance again. He collapsed into silence once more, inwardly resolving to be lured into no more questions concerning relatives. His ignorance seemed to have aroused pathetic sentiments in his aunt. "I ought to have known," she said, shaking her head. "They'd soon forget us in the old country. Here's my own sister's son, and he doesn't remember his cousin's death. Well, well, now we're here. We must see if we can't know one another a little better. Fred, you must take the girls and me everywhere, and show us everything, like a good nephew, you know." Flushington had a horrible mental vision of himself careering about all Cambridge, followed by a long procession of female relatives, a fearful possibility to so shy a man. "Shall you be here long?" he asked. "Only a week or so. We're at the Bull. Very near you, you see. And I'm afraid you think us very bold beggars, Fred, but we're going to ask you to give us something to eat. I've set my heart, so have the girls, haven't you, dears?" On lunching once with a college student in his own room. "There's nothing so extraordinary in it, I assure you," protested Flushington. And I'm afraid there's very little for you to eat. The kitchen and buttery are closed." He said this at a venture, as he felt absolutely unequal to facing the college cook and ordering lunch from that tremendous personage. He would rather order it from his own tutor even. "But if you don't mind potted ham, there's a little at the bottom of this tin, and there's some bread and an inch of butter and marmalade and a few biscuits. And there was some sherry this morning." The girls all professed themselves very hungry and contented with anything, so they sat around the table, and poor Flushington served out meagre rations of all the provisions he could find, even to his figs and French plums, but there was not nearly enough to go round, and they lunched with evident disillusionment, thinking that the college luxury of which they had heard so much had been greatly exaggerated. During luncheon, the aunt began to study Flushington's features attentively. "There's a strong look of poor dear Simon about him when he smiles," she said, looking at him through her gold double glasses. "There. Did you catch it, girls? Just his mother's profile. Turn your face a little more towards the window so as to get the light on your nose. Don't you see the likeness to your aunt's portrait, girls?" And Flushington had to sit still with all the girls' charming eyes fixed critically upon his crimson countenance. He longed to be able to slide down under the table and evade them, but of course he was obliged to remain above. "He's got dear Caroline's nose," the aunt went on triumphantly, and the cousins agreed that he certainly had Caroline's nose, which made Flushington feel vaguely that he ought at least to offer to return it. Presently, one of the girls whispered to her mother, who laughed indulgently. "What do you think this silly child wants me to ask you now, Fred?" she said. "She says she would so like to see what you look like with your college cap and gown on. Would you put them on just to please her?" So Flushington had to put them on and walk slowly up and down the room in them, feeling all the time what a dismal spectacle he was making of himself, while the girls were plainly disappointed and remarked that somehow they had thought the academical costume more becoming. Then began a hotly maintained catechism upon his studies, his amusements, his friends and his mode of life generally, which he met with uneasy shiftings and short, timid answers that they did not appear to think altogether satisfactory. Indeed, the aunt, who by this time felt the potted ham beginning to disagree with her, asked him, with something of severity in her tone, whether he went to church regularly, and he said that he didn't go to church, but was always regular at chapel. On this, she observed coldly that she was sorry to hear her nephew was a dissenter, and Flushington was much too shy to attempt to explain the misunderstanding. He sat quiet and felt miserable while there was another uncomfortable pause. The cousins were whispering together and laughing over little private jokes, and he, after the manner of sensitive men, of course, imagined they were laughing at him, and perhaps he was not very far wrong on this occasion. So he was growing hotter and hotter every second, inwardly cursing his whole race and wishing that his father had been a foundling when there came another tap at the door. "Why, that must be poor old Sophie," said his aunt. "Fred, you remember old Sophie. No, you can't. You were only a baby when she came to live with us, but she'll remember you. She begged so hard to be taken, and so we told her she might come on here slowly after us." And then an old person in a black bonnet came feebly in, and was considerably affected when she saw Flushington. "To think," she quavered, "to think as my dim old eyes should see the child I've nursed on my lap growed out into a college gentleman." And she hugged Flushington and wept on his shoulder till he was almost cataleptic with confusion. But as she grew calmer, she became more critical. She confessed to a certain feeling of disappointment with Flushington. He had not filled out, she said, so fine as he'd promised to fill out. And when she asked if he recollected how he wouldn't be washed, unless they put his little wooden horse on the washstand, and what a business it was to make him swallow his castor oil, it made Flushington feel like a fool. This was quite bad enough, but at last the girls began to go round his rooms, exclaiming at everything, admiring his pipe and umbrella racks, his buffalo horns, and his quaint wooden kettle-holder, until they happened to come upon his French novel. And, being unsophisticated colonial girls with a healthy ignorance of such literature, they wanted Flushington to tell them what it was all about. His presence of mind had gone long before, and this demand threw him into a violent perspiration. He could not invent, and he was painfully racking his brains to find some portion of the tale which would bear repetition when there was another knock at the door. At this, Flushington was perfectly dumb with horror. He prepared himself blankly for another aunt with a fresh relay of female cousins, or more old family servants who had washed him in his infancy, and he sat there cowering. But when the door opened, a tall, fair-haired, good-looking young fellow, who, from his costume, had evidently just come up from the tennis court, came bursting in impulsively. "Oh, I say," he began, "have you heard? Have you seen?" "Oh, beg pardon. Didn't see, you know," he added, as he noticed the extraordinary fact that Flushington had people up. "Oh, let me introduce you," said Flushington, with a vague idea that this was the proper thing to do. "Mr. Lushington, Mrs. No, I don't know her name. My aunt, my cousins." The young man, who had just been about to retire, bowed and stared with a sudden surprise. "Do you know?" he said slowly to the other. "I rather think that's my aunt." I'm afraid not," whispered Flushington. "She seems quite sure she's mine." "Well, I've got an aunt and cousins I've never seen before coming up today," said the newcomer, "and yours is uncommonly like the portrait of mine." "If they belong to you, do take them away," said Flushington feebly. "I don't think I can keep up much longer." "What are you whispering about, Fred?" cried the aunt. "Is it something we are not to know?" "He says he thinks there's been a mistake, and you're not my aunt," explained Flushington. "Oh, does he?" she said, drawing herself up indignantly. "And what does he know about it? I didn't catch his name. Who is he?" "Fred Lushington," he said. "That's my name." "And who are you, if he's Fred Lushington?" she inquired, turning upon the unfortunate owner of the rooms. "I'm Frederick Flushington," he stammered. "I'm sorry, but I can't help it." "Then you're not my nephew at all, sir," cried the aunt. "Thank you very much," said Flushington gratefully. "You see," her real nephew was explaining to her, "there isn't much light on the staircase, and you must have thought his name over the door was F. Lushington. So in you went, you know. The porter told me you'd been asking for me, so I looked in here to see whether you had been heard of, and here you are." "But why didn't he tell me?" she said, for she was naturally annoyed to find that she had been pouring out all her pent-up affection over a perfect stranger, and she even had a dim idea that she had put herself in rather a ridiculous position, which of course made her feel very angry with Flushington. Why couldn't he explain before matters had gone on so far? "How was I to know?" pleaded Flushington. "I dare say I have aunts in Australia, and you said you were one of them." "But you asked after Uncle Samuel?" she said accusingly. "You must have had some object, I cannot say what, in encouraging my mistake. Oh, I'm sure of it." "You told me to ask after him," said the unhappy Flushington. "I thought it was all right. What else was I to do?" The cousins were whispering and laughing together all this time, and regarding their new cousin with shy admiration, very different from the manner in which they had looked at poor Flushington. And the old nurse, too, was overjoyed, and declared that she felt sure from the first that her Master Frederick had not turned out so undersized as him meaning Flushington. "Yes, yes," said Lushington hastily. "Quite a mistake on both sides. Quite sure Flushington isn't the man to go and intercept any fellow's aunt. I wouldn't have done it for worlds." "If I had known," he protested very sincerely. "Well," she said, a little mollified, "I am very sorry we've all disturbed you like this, Mr. Flushington." The unlucky man said something about not minding it now. "And now, Fred, perhaps you will show us the way to the right rooms." "Come along, then," said he. "I'll run down and tell them to send up some lunch." They did not explain that they had lunched already. "You come too, Flushington, and then after lunch you and I will row the ladies up to Byron's pool." "Yes, do come, Mr. Flushington," the ladies said kindly. But Flushington wriggled out of it. To begin with, he did not consider he knew his neighbours sufficiently well. Besides, he had had enough of female society for one day. Indeed, long after that, he would be careful in fastening his door about luncheon time, and if he saw any person in Cambridge who looked as if she might by any possibility turn out to be a relation, he would flee down a back street